Testing the waters of love. Monday morning arrived with a rush of nervous anticipation. Sophie stood before the mirror, smoothing her skirt for the third time, wondering if anyone would notice the subtle glow in her cheeks or the secret tucked behind her smile. Just 48 hours ago, everything had changed with one kiss on her doorstep, and now she had to walk into Stone Innovations and pretend her world hadn't tilted on its axis. "You look pretty, Mommy," Lily observed from the doorway, already dressed for school in her uniform. "Are you wearing lipstick?" Sophie touched her lips self-consciously. "Just a little." "Is it because of Mr. Stone?" Lily asked with innocent directness. Heat flooded Sophie's cheeks. "What makes you ask that?" Lily shrugged. "He looks at you like Daddy used to, before he got mad all the time." The observation, so simple yet profound, left Sophie momentarily speechless. Children saw more than adults gave them credit for. She knelt down to Lily's level, choosing her words carefully. "Mr. Stone, Ethan, is very special to me. But right now, it's just between us, okay? Like a secret mission." Lily's eyes brightened. "I'm good at secrets." The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and Sophie stepped out with practiced composure. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Good morning. Coffee waiting on your desk?" The simple message sent a flutter through her stomach. She rounded the corner to find her desk adorned with a steaming cup from the artisanal cafe across the street, the one she'd mentioned once in passing as having the best vanilla lattes in the city. Through the glass wall, she could see Ethan in his office, head bent over documents, looking every inch the formidable CEO. Nothing in his posture betrayed the man who had held her so tenderly on her sofa, whose lips had... "Morning, Sophie." Claire from accounting chirped, startling her from dangerous thoughts. "Good morning," Sophie replied, hoping her face didn't betray her. The day proceeded with agonizing normalcy. Meetings scheduled, calls fielded, emails answered. Yet beneath this routine flowed an electric undercurrent only she and Ethan could feel. Each time he passed her desk, his fingers would brush against the wood, just close enough to her hand to feel deliberate. In the conference room, he sat at his usual position at the head of the table, but his eyes found hers during key moments, the briefest shared glance carrying conversations only they understood. During the quarterly review meeting, Ethan leaned close while pointing to a figure on her report. "Excellent analysis," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Perhaps we should discuss it further. My office, 5 minutes before lunch?" Sophie nodded, maintaining her professional expression while her heart raced beneath her blouse. Those 5 minutes seemed endless, but when they arrived, Sophie gathered her tablet and walked to his office with measured steps. She closed the door behind her, normal protocol for their daily briefings, but the soft click sounded different today. "I've been wanting to do this all morning," Ethan said, rising from his desk with intent in his stride. He reached her in 3 steps, his hands cupping her face with reverent care before his lips claimed hers. The kiss was both gentle and urgent, days of restraint unraveling in seconds. Sophie's tablet clattered softly onto the nearby chair as her arms wound around his neck. "This is completely unprofessional," she whispered against his mouth, even as her fingers threaded through the soft hair at his nape. "Utterly," he agreed, pressing his forehead to hers. "I'm seriously reconsidering our workplace arrangement." She pulled back slightly. "Are you firing me again, Mr. Stone?" His laugh was low and warm. "Never. But I am finding it increasingly difficult to maintain appropriate distance when all I want to do is this." He brushed his thumb across her lower lip, his gray eyes darkening with an intensity that made her breath catch. "We agreed to be careful," Sophie reminded him, though her body hummed with the desire to be anything but. "We did." Ethan sighed, reluctantly stepping back. "Which is why I've been practicing looking at you without letting the entire office see how I feel." "And how do you feel?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. His expression softened. Like a man who spent too long in darkness suddenly discovering light. The simple poetry of his words made her heart twist. This version of Ethan, vulnerable, open, his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble, was a revelation. "I want to see you tonight," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate register that seemed reserved only for her. "Dinner at my place. Just us. Lily has a sleepover at Maddie's, if I recall your schedule correctly." His smile held a touch of smugness at having paid such close attention. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Have you been planning this, Mr. Stone?" "Merely acknowledging a fortuitous alignment of circumstances, Ms. Winters." The formal address, delivered with a playful spark in his eyes, sent a delicious shiver down her spine. "What time should I arrive?" 7. I'll text you the address and security details." A knock at the door forced them apart with comic swiftness. Sophie grabbed her tablet and adopted her most professional stance as Ethan called, "Come in." Marcus from legal entered with a stack of contracts, his gaze flicking between them with mild curiosity. If he noticed Sophie's slightly flushed cheeks or Ethan's unusually relaxed posture, he gave no indication. As she slipped out of the office, Sophie caught Ethan's eye one last time. The heat and promise she found there made the hours until 7 o'clock stretch like taffy. Ethan's building stood like a gleaming spire against the evening sky, all glass and brushed steel. Sophie gave her name to the concierge, who smiled with a knowing politeness that suggested he was well practiced in discretion. "Mr. Stone is expecting you, Ms. Winters. The private elevator is right this way." The elevator required a key card, which the concierge provided. As the doors closed, Sophie caught her reflection in the mirrored wall, cheeks flushed with anticipation, eyes bright. She'd chosen a simple blue dress that hugged her curves without being overtly seductive. The woman looking back at her seemed both familiar and foreign, transformed by the giddy lightness in her heart. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, Sophie stepped out to the unexpected scent of garlic and herbs. She followed the aroma through a spacious living area with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering cityscape beyond. The kitchen revealed Ethan Stone in a sight she never could have imagined. Sleeves rolled up, designer shirt protected by an apron, adeptly flipping something in a pan that sizzled invitingly. "You cook?" she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. He looked up, a smile breaking across his face that transformed him entirely from powerful CEO to something far more approachable, and somehow even more attractive. "Don't sound so shocked," he replied, setting the pan aside to cross to her. "I've lived alone a long time. It was either learn or subsist on takeout." His greeting kiss was soft and lingering, his hand warm at the small of her back. When he pulled away, his eyes swept over her with undisguised appreciation. "You look beautiful," he murmured. "You look—" Sophie gestured to his apron, embroidered with the words, "The chef is always right." Surprising. His laugh was rich and uninhibited, a sound she was growing to treasure for its rarity. "Wine?" he offered, already reaching for a bottle chilling in an ice bucket. "Please." She took the glass he offered and leaned against the marble countertop, watching him return to his cooking with the same focused intensity he brought to the boardroom. There was something deeply intimate about seeing this private side of him. Domestic, relaxed, his movements confident and precise. "Can I help?" she asked. "Not tonight." He cast a warm glance over his shoulder. "Tonight you're my guest." "I didn't realize accomplished chef was part of your skill set." "There's a lot you don't know about me yet," he replied, a hint of promise in his voice that sent pleasant warmth cascading through her. "I'm looking forward to finding out." Dinner was served on the terrace, the table set with elegant simplicity. Candles flickered in glass hurricanes, protecting their flames from the gentle evening breeze. The meal, roasted salmon with herb sauce, garlic roasted potatoes, and tender asparagus, was exquisite. "This is incredible," Sophie said after her first bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Italy." Ethan swirled wine in his glass, his expression turning nostalgic. "After my parents died, I took a year off before business school. Ended up in a small village outside Florence, staying with an elderly couple who spoke no English. The grandmother took pity on my pathetic eating habits and decided to teach me. Sophie absorbed this unexpected glimpse into his past. You never mentioned living in Italy. It's not in my official biography, he admitted with a small smile. Some parts of my life I've kept private. Not secret, just mine. The significance of him sharing this with her wasn't lost on Sophie. It was another wall coming down, another door being opened. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. His eyes met hers across the table, the candlelight reflecting in their depths. I want to share things with you, Sophie. Things I haven't shared with anyone in a long time. After dinner, they moved to the living room with fresh glasses of wine. The space was elegantly appointed but surprisingly comfortable, with plush sofas and a gas fireplace that Ethan switched on with the press of a button. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city spread out below them like a carpet of stars. Your home is beautiful, Sophie said, taking in the tasteful art on the walls. Original pieces, she suspected, not corporate decoration. It's never felt much like a home, Ethan replied, settling beside her on the sofa. More like a place to sleep between meetings. The honesty in his voice touched her. Sophie leaned into him, drawn by his warmth and the subtle sandalwood scent of his cologne. His arm curled around her shoulders, pulling her closer with gentle insistence. And now? She asked. Now it feels different. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. Everything feels different. They talked for hours, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows as night deepened. Sophie told him about her dreams for the future, her hopes to finish her degree and perhaps start a small consulting business someday. Ethan spoke of his company's origins, the lean years before success, the loneliness of achievement without anyone to share it with. I never minded being alone before, he confessed, his voice low in the firelit room. I convinced myself it was preferable, cleaner, less complicated. And now? Sophie asked, echoing her earlier question. His hand came up to cup her cheek, turning her face to his. Now I can't imagine going back to that emptiness. The kiss that followed was different from their earlier embraces. Deeper, more purposeful. Sophie melted against him, her hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders. The solid warmth of him, the gentle strength in his touch, made her feel both protected and desired. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he whispered, the request both question and plea. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. Yes, she answered simply. His bedroom continued the theme of elegant simplicity. A massive bed with crisp linens, more windows showcasing the glittering cityscape, soft lighting that cast a golden glow across the space. But Sophie barely registered these details, her focus entirely on Ethan as he drew her back into his arms. Their coming together was both inevitable and extraordinary. Tender explorations giving way to passionate discovery, whispered words of wonder exchanged in the darkness. Ethan's touch was reverent, as though she were something precious he feared might vanish. Sophie found herself responding with equal fervor, years of careful self-sufficiency falling away as she surrendered to the connection building between them. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head on his chest, Sophie felt a profound peace settle over her. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear, the gentle stroke of his fingers through her hair. These simple intimacies felt more significant than the physical passion they had shared. What are you thinking? Ethan asked, his voice a rumble she could feel against her cheek. That I'm happy, she answered truthfully, and a little terrified. His arms tightened around her. Terrified? This happened so fast, she admitted. A month ago, you were just my intimidating boss. Now? He prompted when she fell silent. Sophie propped herself up on her elbow to look at him, taking in the softness in his usually sharp features, the vulnerability in his eyes. Now you're someone I can't imagine not having in my life, she confessed. And that's scary for someone who's worked so hard to stand on her own. Understanding dawned in his expression. He reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. Independence and connection aren't mutually exclusive, Sophie, he said quietly. I don't want to diminish your strength. It's what drew me to you. I just want the privilege of standing beside you, not having you lean on me. The wisdom in his words, the respect they conveyed, made Sophie's throat tighten with emotion. She pressed a kiss to his palm. When did you get so insightful about relationships? She asked, trying to lighten the moment. His smile was rueful. I've had a lot of time to think about all the ways I've gotten it wrong in the past. Sophie settled back against his chest, comforted by his steady warmth. So we're really doing this? Yes, he replied without hesitation. Though we'll need to figure out some logistics. Like how to maintain professionalism at work while I'm remembering what you look like without that expensive suit? She teased, feeling him chuckle beneath her. Among other things, he agreed. There's also the question of Lily. Sophie sobered slightly. She already suspects something. Children are perceptive. How do you think she'll feel about it? The genuine concern in his voice touched her deeply. She likes you, Sophie said. But we should take it slowly. She's had enough upheaval in her life. We'll move at whatever pace works for both of you, Ethan assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I'm not going anywhere. The simple promise, delivered with such quiet certainty, eased something in Sophie's chest that had been tight for years. She had grown so accustomed to carrying her burdens alone, to being both mother and father to Lily, that the prospect of sharing that weight, even a little, felt almost dizzying. What about at work? She asked. People will notice eventually. Let them, Ethan replied, his voice taking on that decisive tone she recognized from the boardroom. I'm not ashamed of how I feel about you, Sophie, but I understand if you want discretion for now. Maybe just until we figure things out ourselves, she suggested, before we have to field questions from the entire office. Agreed. His fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. Though I make no promises about my ability to maintain professional distance when you wear that blue blouse that matches your eyes. Sophie laughed softly. I'll retire it immediately. Don't you dare, he growled playfully, rolling them over so she was beneath him, her hair spread across his pillow. Just maybe save it for days when we don't have budget meetings. His kiss silenced her laughter, passion rekindling between them with astonishing ease. As Sophie surrendered to the sensations rising within her, a single thought floated through her mind. This feeling, this connection, it was worth every risk, every complication. For the first time since Lily was born, she was allowing herself to want something purely for herself, to reach for happiness without guilt or reservation. And in Ethan's arms, happiness seemed not just possible, but inevitable. Chapter 17. Whirlwind of Bliss. Mommy, is it time yet? Lily bounced on her tiptoes by the front door, her unicorn backpack already secured, and her favorite purple sneakers double knotted. Sophie glanced at the clock. 7:34 a.m. Ethan wasn't due for another 26 minutes, but Lily had been awake since 6, vibrating with excitement. Not quite, sweetheart. Remember what we said about patience? Lily sighed dramatically. That it's a virtue. But it's the hardest virtue, Mommy. Sophie bit back a smile as she packed snacks into a tote bag. When Ethan had suggested taking them to Wonderworld, the new interactive children's museum that had opened with fanfare and month-long waiting lists, Lily had nearly combusted with joy. What Sophie hadn't expected was her own flutter of anticipation, the warm glow that had settled in her chest at the thought of spending a day together, almost like she hesitated to even think the word family. The doorbell chimed 15 minutes early, sending Lily into a whirlwind of excitement. He's here! He's here! Wait, Lily. But Sophie's caution came too late as her daughter flung open the door and launched herself at Ethan's legs. You're early, Lily exclaimed, beaming up at him. Ethan, dressed in jeans and a casual blue sweater Sophie had never seen before, looked momentarily startled before his expression softened. He crouched down to Lily's level, his smile gentle. "I couldn't wait either," he confided, as though sharing a secret. "I've never been to Wonderworld before." Lily's eyes widened with delighted disbelief. "Never? But you're a grown-up. Grown-ups can go anywhere." "Ah, but it's not as fun going alone," Ethan replied, his gaze lifting to meet Sophie's. The warmth in his eyes made her heart skip. "Some places are better when shared with people you care about." Sophie approached, suddenly self-conscious in her simple jeans and lightweight sweater. At work, their careful professionalism had remained intact despite stolen moments in his office and meaningful glances across conference tables. But here, away from stone innovations, they were stepping into uncharted territory. A day together, in public, with Lily. "You're early," she said, echoing her daughter's greeting but with a softness that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Traffic was lighter than expected," he replied, straightening to his full height. The urge to kiss him hello fluttered through her, but she hesitated, unsure of the boundaries they should establish in front of Lily. Ethan solved the dilemma by leaning in to press a quick, chaste kiss to her cheek. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear the deeper current beneath the simple greeting. "Can we go now? Please?" Lily tugged at Ethan's hand, her impatience returning full force. Sophie opened her mouth to remind Lily about manners, but Ethan just laughed. A free, unguarded sound she rarely heard from him. "Your carriage awaits, Princess Lily," he said with an exaggerated bow that made Lily giggle. "And for the lady of the manor as well," he added with a wink to Sophie. Instead of his usual sleek town car, a more family-friendly SUV waited at the curb, its driver standing ready to help with Lily's booster seat. The thoughtfulness of this detail, that he'd considered Lily's safety and comfort without being asked, warmed Sophie more than she could express. "You thought of everything," she said softly as they watched the driver secure Lily's seat. Ethan's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a casual intimacy that still felt thrillingly new. "I wanted today to be special," he replied. "For all of us." Wonderworld exceeded even the breathless media reports. 6 stories of interactive exhibits blended science, art, and fantasy in a kaleidoscope of color and sound. What surprised Sophie most, however, wasn't the museum itself, but Ethan's transformation. Gone was the reserved CEO who measured his words and guarded his expressions. In his place was a man who knelt beside Lily to examine a colony of leafcutter ants with genuine fascination, who helped her build a towering structure in the engineering zone with serious concentration, who laughed without restraint when a bubble-making station left all 3 of them splattered with iridescent spheres. "Higher, Ethan. I want to see everything," Lily demanded from her perch on his shoulders as they explored the rainforest canopy exhibit. "Your wish is my command," he replied, his hands secure around her ankles as he navigated the elevated walkway. He glanced back at Sophie, his smile almost boyish. "Enjoying the view?" "Immensely," she answered, meaning not the artificial forest, but the sight of the man she was falling for carrying her daughter with such easy care. In the oceanic discovery room, Sophie hung back, watching as Ethan helped Lily identify different sea creatures in the touch pools. He knelt beside her, his expensive jeans dampened by splashing water, pointing out starfish and sea urchins with the patience of a natural teacher. "Did you know," she heard him tell Lily, "that starfish can grow back their arms if they lose one?" "Like lizards with their tails?" Lily asked, eyes wide. "Exactly like that. Nature is pretty amazing." "You're pretty amazing with her," Sophie said later as they watched Lily navigate the cosmic climbing structure, a maze of glowing ropes and platforms designed to mimic constellations. Ethan's expression turned reflective. Children are straightforward. They don't hide their feelings or calculate their responses. It's refreshing. "Is that why the fearsome Ethan Stone is currently sporting glitter on his left cheek?" she teased, reaching up to brush the sparkly evidence of their art station visit from his skin. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth cascading through her. "The fearsome Ethan Stone is on vacation today," he murmured. "This is just Ethan, who's having the best Saturday he can remember." By midday, hunger drove them to the museum's cafe, a whimsical space with tables shaped like giant mushrooms and chairs that looked like fantasy creatures. Lily chatted animatedly between bites of her grilled cheese, recounting her favorite exhibits with exuberant detail. And then the bubbles went everywhere," she exclaimed, gesturing so enthusiastically that her milk nearly toppled. Ethan smoothly steadied the glass, his reflexes surprisingly quick. "Careful there, Starfish," he said, the nickname falling naturally from his lips. Sophie's breath caught at the easy endearment. Across the table, Ethan seemed to realize what he'd done, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "I like that," Lily declared, oblivious to the moment passing between the adults. "You can call me Starfish because I'm brave and tough and can grow back my arms." Relief softened Ethan's features. "You certainly are brave and tough," he agreed, shooting Sophie a glance that asked if the nickname was truly okay. She nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. James had never given Lily pet names, had barely engaged with her at all toward the end. Watching Ethan's gentle interaction with her daughter, the genuine interest, the natural affection, awakened a protective tenderness in Sophie's heart. After lunch, they discovered the museum's carnival corner, complete with classic games and a restored vintage carousel. Ethan proved surprisingly adept at the ring toss, winning a plush octopus that Lily immediately hugged to her chest. "Don't think I've forgotten about you," he told Sophie with a playful glint in his eye as he handed over the basketball he'd just won. 3 perfect shots later, Sophie found herself presented with a stuffed fox, its russet fur soft against her fingers. "Are you spoiling us, Mr. Stone?" she asked, clutching the toy with unexpected delight. "Absolutely," he replied without a hint of apology. "I find I enjoy it immensely." As Lily clambered onto a carousel horse, a purple one with silver stars, naturally, Ethan guided Sophie toward a bench with a clear view. "Thank you for today," she said, watching her daughter wave excitedly as the ride began. "I haven't seen her this happy in a long time." Ethan's arm settled around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "Thank you for sharing her with me," he replied, his voice low with sincerity. "For sharing your life with me." Sophie leaned into his warmth, allowing herself to savor the simple pleasure of being held. "It feels right, doesn't it? The 3 of us together like this." "It feels perfect," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. As the carousel made its final rotation, Sophie caught sight of Lily's face, flushed with joy, eyes sparkling. Her daughter caught her watching and waved frantically, calling out, "Look at me, Mommy. Look at me, Ethan." "I see you, Starfish," Ethan called back, his deep voice carrying over the carnival music. "You're the queen of the carousel." Watching them together, Sophie felt something click into place in her heart. A piece she hadn't known was missing. The afternoon passed in a blur of exhibits and laughter. By 5 o'clock, even Lily's boundless energy began to flag, her steps slowing as they explored the final gallery. "I think someone's running out of steam," Sophie observed as Lily leaned heavily against Ethan's leg while examining a display of gemstones. "I'm not tired," Lily protested through a yawn that belied her words. With a swift, natural movement that took Sophie by surprise, Ethan scooped Lily into his arms. "Even Starfish need rest," he said gently as Lily's head drooped against his shoulder. "But I want to see everything," she mumbled, even as her eyelids fluttered. "Wonderworld will still be here another day," he promised. "And so will I." The simple pledge, offered casually to a drowsy child, struck Sophie like a physical touch. "So will I." 3 words that contained multitudes. By the time they reached the car, Lily was fast asleep, her new octopus clutched in one hand. Ethan settled her carefully into her booster seat with a tenderness that made Sophie's heart constrict. "You're good at that," she said softly as they watched the driver pull away from the curb. "At what?" "Taking care." she replied simply. His expression turned thoughtful. I've spent most of my adult life taking care of business interests, Sophie. Numbers, assets, investments. Taking care of people, real people who matter, is entirely different. His gaze dropped to their joined hands. I find I prefer it. The ride back to Sophie's apartment passed in comfortable quiet, broken only by Lily's soft breathing from the back seat. Sophie leaned against Ethan's shoulder, the peaceful exhaustion of a day well spent settling over her. Would you like to come up? She asked as they pulled up to her building. I could make dinner. Nothing fancy, but I'd love to. He interrupted gently. If you're sure it's not too much after such a full day. I'm sure, she replied, suddenly certain she wasn't ready for this day to end. Sophie unlocked the apartment door, Lily still drowsing in Ethan's arms. Her room is down the hall, first door on the right, she whispered. If you don't mind? Not at all. He murmured back, carrying Lily with careful steps. Sophie busied herself in the kitchen, assembling a simple pasta dish while listening to the soft murmur of Ethan's voice as he settled Lily into bed. The domesticity of the moment, preparing dinner while he tucked in her daughter, felt both novel and strangely familiar, as though they had been doing this dance for years instead of hours. She woke up just enough to change into pajamas, Ethan reported as he joined her in the kitchen. But she insisted on saying goodnight to you before she falls back asleep. Sophie dried her hands on a dish towel. The sauce needs to simmer anyway. Make yourself comfortable. When she returned to the kitchen several minutes later, she found Ethan had rolled up his sleeves and was chopping additional vegetables for the sauce. The sight of him, billionaire CEO Ethan Stone, working comfortably in her modest kitchen struck her as both incongruous and perfectly right. Is Lily settled? He asked, not looking up from his task. Out like a light, but not before telling me this was the best day ever and asking when we can go back with Uncle Ethan. His knife paused mid-chop. Uncle Ethan? Is that okay? Sophie asked, suddenly uncertain. I can talk to her about it if... It's more than okay. He interrupted, setting down the knife to face her. The emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. I've never been anyone's uncle before. Sophie moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his expression. She adores you, you know. Children can sense when someone genuinely cares. I do care, he said softly. About her. About you. More than I thought possible just a few months ago. The simple honesty of his words wrapped around Sophie's heart like a gentle caress. She closed the distance between them, sliding her arms around his waist and breathing in the now familiar scent of his cologne mingled with the day's adventures. Thank you for today, she murmured against his chest. His arms encircled her, strong and secure. Thank you for letting me be part of it. They finished preparing dinner together, moving around Sophie's small kitchen with surprising synchronicity. Over glasses of wine and steaming bowls of pasta, they reminisced about the day's highlights, their laughter soft in the apartment's quiet. I never had days like this growing up, Ethan confessed as they settled on the sofa afterward, Sophie tucked against his side. My parents were distant, good providers, but not particularly warm. Is that why you've kept people at arm's length? She asked gently. His fingers traced idle patterns on her shoulder. Partly, and partly because success came early, which makes it hard to know who really sees you and who sees what you represent. What changed? Sophie asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Ethan smiled, the expression softening his usually sharp features. A beautiful waitress spilled champagne on my shoes and didn't back down when I was unreasonable. Dreadfully unprofessional of her, Sophie teased. Thank God for that, he murmured, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Today, watching you and Lily, being included in that, I felt something I didn't know I was missing. What's that? Belonging, he said simply, being part of something real. The word resonated in Sophie's chest like a struck bell. For years, it had been just her and Lily against the world, a complete circle that needed no additions. Yet somehow, Ethan had slipped inside their carefully constructed fortress, not by breaking down walls, but by showing them a door they hadn't known existed. I felt it too, she admitted, like pieces falling into place. His kiss was gentle at first, a tender affirmation of her words. But as Sophie's fingers threaded through his hair, drawing him closer, the kiss deepened with a hunger neither could deny. Months of growing attraction, weeks of stolen moments, and a day of shared joy crystallized into this. His hands warm against her skin, her heart racing beneath his touch. "Stay," she whispered against his lips. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling back to search her face. "With Lily. She's sound asleep after her big day," Sophie assured him. "And I'm not ready for this day to end." Ethan's smile was slow and tender as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Neither am I." Later, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms in the soft darkness of Sophie's bedroom, Ethan pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Today was perfect," he murmured. Sophie agreed sleepily. "A whirlwind of bliss." His soft laugh rumbled against her cheek. "I like that description." "That's us," she said, nestling closer. "A whirlwind, but the kind that builds things instead of destroying them." As Sophie drifted toward sleep, warm and secure in Ethan's embrace, she felt a certainty settle into her bones. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and surely there would be many, this feeling, this connection was worth fighting for. In the space of a day, what had begun as a tentative romance had deepened into something that felt remarkably like family. And for the first time in years, Sophie allowed herself to dream of forever. Chapter 18. Shadows of Doubt. Monday morning greeted Sophie with gentle spring sunshine and the lingering warmth of weekend memories. She hummed as she prepared Lily's lunch, the echo of Ethan's goodbye kiss still tingling on her lips. He'd slipped away at dawn with a whispered promise to see her at the office, his fingertips trailing reluctantly along her cheek. 2 blissful weeks had passed since their day at Wonderworld. 2 weeks of stolen evenings, shared laughter, and a happiness so complete it sometimes took her breath away. At work, they maintained their professional facade, though Sophie caught herself watching the clock until their scheduled meetings, treasuring those moments when Ethan's CEO mask slipped just enough for her to glimpse the man who had begun leaving toothbrushes at her apartment. "Mommy, can Uncle Ethan come for pizza night on Friday?" Lily asked, breaking into Sophie's reverie as she packed her backpack. The ease with which Lily had accepted Ethan in their lives still amazed Sophie. "We'll have to ask him, sweetheart." "He'll say yes," Lily declared with the certainty of a child who had already wrapped a powerful man around her little finger. "He always says yes to pizza." Sophie smiled, brushing Lily's hair into a neat ponytail. "You might be right about that." After dropping Lily at school, Sophie arrived at Stone Innovations with 15 minutes to spare before the morning briefing. As she crossed the sleek lobby, she noticed a cluster of employees by the coffee bar falling suddenly silent, their gazes tracking her progress to the elevator. Strange, she thought, but pushed it aside as she stepped into the lift. The executive floor seemed unusually animated for a Monday morning. Conversations halted abruptly as she passed, replaced by meaningful glances and poorly concealed whispers. Claire from accounting offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Marcus from legal studied her with undisguised curiosity. Sophie settled at her desk, unease prickling along her spine. She logged into her computer to check Ethan's schedule, finding his morning packed with back-to-back meetings. A notification pinged. An email from Megan in HR with the subject line, "Thought you should see this." Sophie clicked it open to find a link to City Insider, a notorious gossip column. Her stomach dropped as she followed the link. There, splashed across her screen, was a grainy but unmistakable photo of Ethan carrying a sleepy Lily in his arms as they exited Wonderworld. Sophie walked beside them, Ethan's free hand clasped in hers, her face upturned to his with an expression of unguarded tenderness. The headline made her blood run cold. "Stone cold thawed?" Reclusive Billionaire's Mystery Family. Outing the article beneath was brief but suggestive. Notorious bachelor Ethan Stone, 36, CEO of Stone Innovations and number 8 on our Billionaires Under 40 list, was spotted playing Family Man at Wonderworld Children's Museum last weekend. The tech mogul, known for his cutthroat business tactics and frosty demeanor, showed a decidedly warmer side while accompanying an unidentified woman and child. Sources close to Stone Innovations suggest the mystery brunette may be his executive assistant. From assistant to something more? We're watching this space. Sophie's cheeks burned as the implication sank in. The buzzing conversations, the curious glances. Suddenly, it all made horrible sense. Their careful discretion had been shattered by one blurry photograph. Movement at her peripheral vision caught her attention. Through the glass wall of his office, she could see Ethan on a call, his brow furrowed in concentration. He hadn't seen the article yet, or if he had, he gave no indication of it affecting him. Sophie straightened her shoulders and focused on her screen, determined to project professionalism despite the churning in her stomach. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Their relationship was between them. No one else. At 11, Sophie headed to the break room for coffee, desperately needing the caffeine to combat her frayed nerves. As she approached, the door stood slightly ajar, voices drifting through the gap. "Clearly planned it," said a female voice Sophie recognized as Jennifer from marketing. I mean, what better target than the boss? He's loaded, single, and she's got a kid to support. Pretty convenient timing, too, replied another voice, Derek from finance. Barely 3 months after he hired her? Please. You have to admit she's smart, Jennifer continued. Using the kid like that? What man can resist playing hero to a struggling single mom? Classic gold digger strategy. Sophie froze, coffee cup halfway to the machine, her hand trembling slightly. Stone's no fool, Derek scoffed. He's probably just having fun. No way he's serious about someone like her. Someone like me, Sophie whispered to herself, the words like tiny daggers. She retreated silently, abandoning her quest for coffee. Back at her desk, she stared unseeing at her computer screen, the cruel words echoing in her mind. Gold digger. Using the kid. No way he's serious. Was that how everyone saw her? As a calculating opportunist who had deliberately set her sights on Ethan for his money? The thought made her physically ill. Worse was the tiny, insidious voice that whispered, what if they're right about one thing? What if he's not serious? What if this is just a passing amusement for a man who could have anyone? Sophie had always prided herself on her independence, on building a life for herself and Lily without relying on anyone else. The suggestion that she would use her daughter as a pawn in some gold-digging scheme cut to the core of her identity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Lunch in my office? Need to see you. Sophie hesitated, her thumbs hovering over the screen. Did he know about the article? Had he heard the rumors too? Was this conversation going to be the beginning of the end? Of course. 12:30? She replied, professionalism winning out over the knot of anxiety in her chest. The morning crawled by, each minute stretching endlessly as Sophie tried to focus on her work while ignoring the sidelong glances and hushed conversations that fell silent whenever she approached. By the time she gathered her tablet for the lunch meeting, her nerves were stretched to breaking point. Ethan looked up when she entered his office, his expression unreadable. Close the door, please. Sophie complied, her heart hammering against her ribs. She remained standing, clutching her tablet like a shield. You've seen it, he said. Not a question. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his immaculate hair. A rare gesture of frustration. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated something like this might happen. It's fine, Sophie managed, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. No, it's not. His gaze sharpened, seeing through her flimsy attempt at nonchalance. Something else is bothering you. What is it? Sophie hesitated, torn between protecting herself by deflecting and the honesty they'd promised each other. It's nothing. Just people talking. What people? Saying what? The edge in his voice was unmistakable. It doesn't matter, she insisted, moving to the window to avoid his penetrating gaze. Gossip is inevitable. She heard him rise, felt his approach more than saw it. His reflection appeared beside hers in the glass, his expression concerned. Sophie, he said softly. Talk to me. The gentleness undid her. They think I planned this, she admitted, the words rushing out. That I deliberately set my sights on you because of your money. That I'm using Lily to trap you. Anger flashed across his face, quickly controlled. Who said this? Does it matter? It's what they're all thinking. She wrapped her arms around herself. The gold-digging assistant who seduced her billionaire boss. That's ridiculous, Ethan said firmly. Anyone who knows you? But they don't know me, Sophie interrupted. They just see what they expect to see. A single mother struggling to make ends meet who suddenly lands in the orbit of one of the city's wealthiest men. She gave a bitter laugh. It's like a storyline from a bad soap opera. Sophie, look at me. Ethan's hands settled gently on her shoulders, turning her to face him. Do you honestly think I care what anyone in this building thinks about us? You should, she insisted. You have a reputation to maintain, a company to run. This kind of gossip could affect how people perceive you as a leader. His expression softened. Is that what you're worried about? My reputation? Among other things, she admitted. Such as? Sophie looked down, studying the intricate pattern of the carpet. Whether there's a grain of truth in what they're saying. About you being a gold digger? Incredulity colored his voice. That's absurd. Not that part, she said quietly. The part about you not being serious. About this being temporary. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You think I'm just having fun? That you and Lily are some kind of passing amusement? Put so bluntly, her fears sounded ridiculous, but Sophie couldn't quite dismiss them. We come from different worlds, Ethan. I'm a single mother with student loans and a tiny apartment. She gestured around his expansive office. This. And that matters to you? He asked, a new edge to his voice. No, but it might matter to you eventually, she admitted. Or to the people in your life. The board members, the investors, your social circle. I don't exactly fit the profile of the women you typically date. Thank God for that, Ethan said with unexpected fervor. Do you know what my life was like before you spilled that champagne on me? Hollow, empty, successful by every external measure and utterly devoid of genuine connection. His hands framed her face with gentle insistence. You and Lily have given me something I didn't even know I was missing. The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tighten. But the talk will die down. He finished for her. Or it won't. Either way, it doesn't change how I feel about you. About us. A knock at the door interrupted them. Ethan dropped his hands from her face with obvious reluctance. Come in. Julia, Ethan's PR director, entered with a tablet in hand. I've drafted the memo as requested, Mr. Stone. Would you like to review it before distribution? Please, Ethan replied, taking the tablet. Sophie watched as he scanned the document, making a few adjustments before returning it to Julia with a nod. Send it immediately, and schedule the department head meeting for 3 o'clock. Yes, sir. Julia glanced between them, her expression professionally neutral before exiting the office. What was that about? Sophie asked. A company-wide memo clarifying our personal relationship policy, Ethan replied, moving back to his desk, and reminding everyone that Stone Innovations has a zero-tolerance approach to workplace harassment or gossip that creates a hostile environment. Warmth spread through Sophie's chest at his protective gesture. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. His expression was resolute. I won't have anyone making you uncomfortable in a place where you deserve nothing but professional respect. And the department head meeting? To make my position absolutely clear in person, he said simply. This stops now. Sophie wavered, touched by his decisive action, yet still unsettled. Won't this just confirm what everyone's already thinking? That we're together? We are together, Ethan pointed out. Unless... His confident expression faltered slightly. Unless you're having second thoughts? No, Sophie said quickly. No second thoughts. Just concerns. Ethan's relief was visible. He moved around the desk to stand before her again. Sophie, I can't control what people think or say, but I can control how I respond to it and how I protect what matters to me. His voice dropped to that intimate register that never failed to send shivers along her spine. And you matter. More than my reputation. More than this company. More than anything else in my life right now. The simple declaration melted something frozen inside her. I just don't want to make things difficult for you. The only difficulty would be not having you in my life, he said quietly. Everything else is just noise. When he pulled her into his arms, Sophie went willingly, burying her face against his chest and breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. She believed him. Believed in the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, in the strength of his arms around her, in the sincerity of his words. Yet as she closed her eyes, a small shadow of doubt lingered in the corners of her mind. Not about Ethan's feelings, but about the world they lived in. His world of wealth and privilege, of scrutiny and judgment. A world where a single mother from a modest background might never truly belong, no matter how genuine the emotions between them. For now, though, she pushed those thoughts aside and simply held on to the man who had somehow become the center of her universe. Whatever storms might lie ahead, this moment, this embrace, felt like shelter. Chapter 19, Exes and Expectations. The Stone Innovations annual charity gala transformed the company's austere headquarters into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers hung from the normally utilitarian ceiling, casting prismatic light across the sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits. Sophie smoothed the silky fabric of her midnight blue dress, a splurge she'd justified as an investment, and tried to quell the butterflies in her stomach. You look stunning, Ethan murmured, appearing at her side with 2 flutes of champagne. In his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he was breathtaking, the very image of the billionaire CEO that society pages fawned over. Yet his eyes, warm and focused solely on her, belonged to the private Ethan, the man who had spent the previous evening helping Lily build a fort in Sophie's living room. Thank you, she replied, accepting the champagne. Though I feel a bit out of my depth. Last time I attended one of these galas, I was carrying the drinks, not drinking them. You belong here, he said, his voice low and certain. With me. Sophie smiled, though the knot of anxiety in her chest didn't fully unravel. 2 months into their relationship, she was still adjusting to these glimpses of Ethan's world, the rarefied air of wealth and privilege that he navigated with such ease. Despite his reassurances, the whispers at work had only intensified after his protective memo, and tonight marked her first official appearance as his date at a company function. Mr. Stone, there you are. A silver-haired man in an impeccable suit approached, accompanied by a striking woman with copper hair and flawless makeup. Something in Ethan's posture shifted subtly. A tensing Sophie might have missed if her body hadn't been attuned to his. Richard. Ethan greeted him with a practiced smile. Good to see you. You remember Claudia Reynolds, I'm sure? Richard said, gesturing to his companion. She's just joined our board at Meridian Trust. Of course, Ethan replied, his tone perfectly calibrated between warmth and reserve. Congratulations on the appointment, Claudia. The woman's smile was dazzling, her green eyes sharp with intelligence. Thank you, Ethan. It's been too long. Sophie fought the urge to fidget as Claudia's gaze slid to her, cool and assessing. There was history here. Something in the air between Ethan and this woman that crackled with unspoken memories. "This is Sophie Winters," Ethan said, his hand finding the small of Sophie's back in a gesture that felt both protective and claiming. "Sophie," Claudia repeated, extending a manicured hand. "Ethan's assistant, correct? I believe I read something about you recently." The pause before assistant was slight but deliberate, carrying the weight of the gossip columns that had speculated about their relationship. Sophie kept her smile steady as she accepted the handshake. "That's right," she replied evenly. "It's nice to meet you." Ethan always did value competence in his staff, Claudia remarked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And how long have you been with Stone Innovations?" 5 months, Sophie answered. "How fascinating," Claudia murmured. "And before that? I'm always curious about career paths." The question was perfectly polite yet laced with something that made Sophie's spine stiffen. "I was at Lumiere Restaurant." "The new French place?" Richard asked, joining the conversation. "Yes," Sophie said. "I was a waitress there while finishing my economics degree." "A waitress? How versatile." Claudia's smile remained fixed, her tone suggesting she'd just been told Sophie had been a professional snake charmer. "From serving champagne to—" Her gaze flicked deliberately to Ethan. "Other responsibilities. Quite a leap." Ethan's hand pressed more firmly against Sophie's back. "Sophie's economic analysis has been invaluable to our Q3 projections," he said, his voice carrying a subtle edge beneath its smooth surface. "Richard, I understand Meridian is considering the Singapore expansion. Sophie just completed a remarkable assessment of Asian market potential that you might find enlightening." The deliberate pivot steered the conversation to safer waters, with Sophie gratefully contributing her professional insights. Throughout the exchange, she remained acutely aware of Claudia's calculated glances and the elegant ease with which the woman wielded her wineglass, like a weapon she'd been born holding. "We should circulate," Ethan said after several minutes. "Richard, always good to catch up. Claudia, best of luck with the new position." As they moved away, Sophie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Previous acquaintance?" she asked lightly, though she already knew the answer. "We dated," Ethan confirmed, his voice neutral. 2 years ago." "I see." Sophie took a careful sip of champagne. "She's very polished." "Among other things," he replied cryptically. Before Sophie could press further, they were swept into the social current of the gala. Board members to charm, donors to thank, speeches to endure. Ethan kept her close, his hand returning to the small of her back whenever possible, a warm anchor in the sea of unfamiliar faces and veiled curiosity. Yet throughout the evening, Sophie caught glimpses of Claudia across the room, always watching, always perfectly poised in her designer gown that probably cost more than Sophie's monthly rent. Each time their eyes met, Claudia offered a smile that managed to be simultaneously cordial and dismissive. "Don't let her get to you," Ethan murmured during a rare quiet moment. "She excels at making people feel inadequate." "She's very good at it," Sophie admitted. "You have history." "Ancient history," he corrected. "And not particularly pleasant." "She's still watching you," Sophie observed, "like she's waiting for something." Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Then she'll be waiting a very long time." The cryptic response hung between them, adding to the growing collection of questions Sophie was accumulating about Ethan's past. Questions that would have to wait for a more private setting. That opportunity came hours later, after the gala had wound down and Ethan's driver had delivered them to his penthouse. Sophie slipped off her heels with a grateful sigh while Ethan loosened his bow tie, the formal personas they'd maintained all evening slowly dissolving in the sanctuary of his home. "You were magnificent tonight," Ethan said, pouring them each a nightcap. Everyone was impressed. "I felt like I was taking a test I hadn't studied for," Sophie admitted, accepting the crystal tumbler. "Especially with Claudia grading on a curve." Ethan's mouth quirked. "An apt metaphor. Are you going to tell me about her?" Sophie asked, settling onto the sofa. Whatever happened between you clearly left an impression. He hesitated, then joined her, leaving a small space between them that felt uncharacteristic. It's not a particularly flattering story. I'd still like to hear it. Ethan swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his expression turning inward. We met at a function similar to tonight's. She was brilliant, ambitious, familiar with my world. On paper, a perfect match. And off paper? Sophie prompted when he fell silent. A calculated investment. His voice hardened slightly. I discovered, too late, that she viewed our relationship as a strategic merger. My wealth and connections, her family name and social credentials. Sophie absorbed this, picturing the striking redhead measuring Ethan's worth in dividends and social capital. How did you find out? I overheard her on the phone with her mother, he said, his gaze fixed on some middle distance, discussing how she'd almost sealed the deal and how my new money would rehabilitate their family's fading fortune. His smile was bitter. She had a 5-year plan that included marriage, a strategic divorce, and a very generous settlement. Ethan, Sophie breathed, reaching for his hand. I'm so sorry. He entwined his fingers with hers, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. It was a valuable lesson. About trust. About people's motivations. His eyes met hers, vulnerability evident in their depths. When you spilled that champagne and stood up to me afterward, it was like encountering a different species, someone who didn't calculate every interaction for maximum benefit. The admission touched Sophie deeply, illuminating another facet of the complex man she'd fallen for. Is that why you were so... She searched for the right word. Cold? Distant? Suspicious? He gave a self-deprecating laugh. Claudia wasn't the first to see dollar signs instead of a person, just the most methodical about it. Sophie considered this, thinking of the careful walls Ethan had built around himself, the fortress she had gradually been allowed to enter. And tonight, what was she doing? Recalculating, Ethan said simply, seeing if there might still be an opening. With you? Sophie couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. After what she did? People like Claudia don't see relationships as matters of the heart, he explained. They're business arrangements, subject to renegotiation if terms improve. Sophie shook her head, struggling to comprehend such coldness. Yet beneath her indignation stirred an uncomfortable thought. To the outside world, couldn't her own situation appear similarly opportunistic? A single mother, struggling financially, suddenly in a relationship with her wealthy employer? Does it bother you? She asked quietly. The things people must think about us? Ethan's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? I saw how people looked at us tonight, Sophie said, setting her glass aside. I heard the whispers. The waitress who managed to land the billionaire. They probably think I'm not so different from Claudia, just less sophisticated about it. Sophie, she fits in your world, she continued, giving voice to the insecurities that had been building since the encounter. She knows which fork to use without thinking about it, can discuss investments and board politics without stumbling. Next to her, I felt like a child playing dress-up. Stop. Ethan set his glass down with a decisive click. Is that what you've been thinking all evening? Sophie looked down at their joined hands. It's hard not to, when the contrast is right there in Dolce & Gabbana. Look at me, Ethan said, his voice gentle but firm. When she met his gaze, the intensity there caught her breath. That world, the one you think Claudia fits into so perfectly, is largely artificial. A carefully constructed facade where people like her excel precisely because there's nothing authentic beneath the polish. He shifted closer, cradling her face between his palms. Do you know what I saw tonight? Watching you talk with board members and donors? Someone genuine, intelligent, unafraid to admit when you didn't know something instead of bluffing. Do you have any idea how rare that is? The earnestness in his expression made Sophie's throat tighten. I just don't want to embarrass you. The only thing that would embarrass me would be pretending to be someone I'm not, he replied, or being with someone who does. His thumbs stroked gently along her cheekbones. When I'm with Lily and you, I feel real, like I can breathe. Do you understand how precious that is to me? The raw honesty in his voice melted something frozen inside her. Sophie nodded, leaning into his touch. Good, he murmured, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. Because nothing Claudia or anyone else thinks matters compared to that. Later, as they lay tangled in his sheets, Sophie rested her head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Though his words had soothed her immediate fears, she couldn't quite banish the image of Claudia's perfectly manicured world, a world where Sophie and Lily would always be outsiders. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked, his fingers drawing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Sophie hesitated, then opted for honesty. Whether love is enough. His hand stilled. Enough for what? To bridge our differences, she admitted. Your life and mine, they're so far apart, Ethan. Tonight made that clearer than ever. He shifted to look down at her, concern evident in his expression. Do the differences bother you that much? Not for me, she said carefully. But for you. I wonder if someday you'll regret choosing someone who brings complications to your life instead of advantages. Ethan's brow furrowed. Is that how you see yourself? As a complication? A single mother with limited means, from a background worlds away from yours? In the context of your life, yes, Sophie replied, the words painful but necessary. Your colleagues, your business associates, they expect someone like Claudia at your side. Someone who enhances your image rather than raising eyebrows. I don't give a damn what they expect, Ethan said, an edge creeping into his voice. And the fact that you think I would, that I could regret choosing genuine happiness over image, suggests you don't know me as well as I thought. The hurt behind his words made Sophie wince. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He asked, sitting up against the headboard, suddenly more distant than the inches between them suggested. Sophie pulled the sheet higher, feeling unexpectedly vulnerable. Just that I understand the reality of our situation. That loving each other doesn't make our differences disappear. No, it doesn't, Ethan agreed, his voice carefully controlled. But it should make them irrelevant. Should, Sophie echoed softly. But does it? Really? Can you honestly say that my background, my circumstances, the gossip, none of it matters to you? Yes, he said firmly. I can. Sophie wished she could leave it there, bask in his certainty. But the memory of Claudia's dismissive glance, the whispers that had followed them throughout the evening, pushed her forward. And what about Lily? Have you thought about what it means to bring a child into this situation? The scrutiny she might face? Something flashed in Ethan's eyes, a momentary hurt quickly masked. Of course I have. I care about Lily's well-being as much as yours. I know you do, Sophie said quickly. That's not what I'm questioning. It's just, everything is happening so fast. Sometimes I wonder if we've really thought through all the implications. Ethan was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dimly lit room. Is this about Claudia, or is it something more? Both, Sophie admitted. Seeing her tonight, someone who would slip effortlessly into your life without causing ripples, it made me question whether I'm being fair to you. Whether I'm asking you to make sacrifices you don't fully understand yet. Shouldn't that be my decision to make? He asked quietly. Yes, Sophie conceded. But it should be an informed one. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. Sophie, I'm not some naive schoolboy. I know exactly what I'm choosing, who I'm choosing, and I've never been more certain of anything. She wanted to believe him completely, to let his conviction wash away her doubts. But the seeds planted by Claudia's subtle condescension watered by weeks of workplace whispers, had taken root too deeply to be uprooted in a single conversation. "I want to believe that's enough," she whispered. Ethan reached for her then, drawing her back into his arms with a tenderness that contrasted with the tension in his voice. "Then believe it," he murmured against her hair. "Because it is." As Sophie closed her eyes, safe in his embrace, she wished she could silence the small voice inside that whispered of differences too great to bridge, of worlds too disparate to reconcile. Ethan's steady breathing eventually deepened into sleep, while Sophie lay awake, wondering how long love could stand against the relentless tide of reality. Chapter 20. Secrets and Misunderstandings. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Stone Innovations, casting warm rectangles across Sophie's desk. She hummed softly as she organized Ethan's schedule for the upcoming Charity Foundation launch. 3 weeks had passed since the gala, and though the encounter with Claudia had left Sophie unsettled, Ethan's unwavering attention had gradually soothed her doubts. Last night, he'd surprised her and Lily with tickets to the Botanical Gardens butterfly exhibition. Watching him crouch beside her daughter, their heads bent together as a monarch butterfly landed on Lily's outstretched finger, had filled Sophie with a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. Later, after Lily was asleep and they'd retreated to her tiny balcony with glasses of wine, Ethan had spoken of future plans. Summer weekends at his lake house, perhaps a trip to Italy in the fall. "Ms. Winters?" Marcus from legal appeared at her desk, interrupting her pleasant reverie. "These need Mr. Stone's signature before the board meeting." He placed a folder on her desk, his expression professionally neutral. "I'll make sure he sees them," Sophie replied, grateful that the initial awkwardness with her colleagues had largely faded. Ethan's protective stance had quelled the most blatant gossip, though she occasionally still caught curious glances when they thought she wasn't looking. "Thank you." Marcus hesitated. "And, the Jameson contract revision should be ready by tomorrow. Mr. Reed mentioned you'd want to see it first." Sophie nodded. Victor Reed, Ethan's right-hand man and longtime friend, had been including her in more strategic decisions lately, a development that both pleased and surprised her. Though initially reserved, Victor had gradually warmed to her, even complimenting her work on the Asian market analysis. As Marcus departed, Sophie checked her watch. 11:45. Ethan was due back from his off-site meeting at noon. She gathered the files requiring his attention and headed toward his office to prepare for their afternoon briefing. The door to Ethan's private conference room stood slightly ajar as she passed. Victor's distinct voice drifted through the gap. "Best decision you've made in years, despite how it started." Sophie slowed, her professional curiosity piqued by the mention of a business decision she might need to know about. "I've admitted you were right," came Ethan's familiar voice, though I maintain my initial motivations were sound. "Sound but complicated," Victor replied with a short laugh. "When you told me you were hiring the waitress you'd gotten fired, I thought you'd lost your mind. PR move or guilty conscience, either way, it seemed risky." Sophie froze, the files clutched against her chest suddenly heavy as lead. "It worked out better than I anticipated," Ethan said, his tone warmer than he typically used in business discussions. "In every possible way." "Clearly." Victor's voice held a knowing edge. "Though I'm still not sure which came first, recognizing her potential as an assistant or as something more personal." "That's not a question I'm going to dignify with an answer," Ethan replied, though without heat. "Fair enough," Victor conceded. "Regardless, what started as damage control has turned into something good for both of you. And for the company, her work is exceptional." "More than exceptional," Ethan agreed. "Now, about the Singapore proposal." Sophie didn't wait to hear more. She retreated silently, her heart hammering against her ribs as Victor's words echoed in her mind. PR move or guilty conscience. Hiring the waitress you'd gotten fired. Damage control. She returned to her desk on autopilot, setting the files down with numb fingers. The bright spring sunshine now seemed harsh and revealing, illuminating a truth she'd been too blinded by happiness to see. Ethan hadn't hired her because he recognized her potential. He'd hired her out of guilt, or worse, as some kind of public relations strategy to mitigate the damage from firing a single mother. Every opportunity, every kind gesture suddenly appeared in a sinister new light. Had anything between them been genuine, or had she simply been a problem to solve, a wrong to right? Sophie? She looked up, startled, to find Ethan standing before her desk, concern etched across his features. Are you all right? You look pale. Fine, she managed, forcing her professional mask into place. Just a headache coming on. These need your signature before the board meeting. She handed him the folder Marcus had left, careful to avoid brushing his fingers with hers. Ethan frowned slightly but took the documents. We have the foundation briefing at 1. Should I ask Julia to step in if you're not feeling well? No need, Sophie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll be fine. His gaze lingered on her face, searching. You'd tell me if something was wrong? Would I? Sophie wondered, the question echoing hollowly as she nodded. Of course. The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but how could she articulate the betrayal writhing in her chest? How could she admit that she'd overheard his confession of guilt? That everything between them might be built on a foundation of obligation and damage control? The afternoon crawled by in a surreal haze. Sophie went through the motions of her work with mechanical precision, speaking when spoken to, smiling when appropriate, all while feeling as though she were watching herself from a great distance. During the foundation briefing, she delivered her prepared remarks and answered questions with her usual competence, ignoring the weight of Ethan's concerned gaze. When her phone buzzed with a text from him, "Dinner tonight? I miss you already." She stared at the screen, wondering if even this simple affection had been born of guilt. Had he looked at her that first day and seen not a capable woman but a charity case? Someone to rescue, to fix, to use as proof of his own goodness? Sorry, not tonight. Lily has a school project due tomorrow. Rain check? She replied, the excuse technically true but deliberately distancing. His response came quickly. Of course. Need any help with the project? The offer, so typical of him lately, twisted the knife deeper. Was his involvement with Lily also motivated by pity? Sophie's fingers hovered over the screen before typing, "We've got it handled. Thanks." By 5 o'clock, Sophie had constructed an emotional wall so carefully that when Ethan stopped by her desk before leaving, she managed a smile that almost reached her eyes. You sure you're okay? He asked, his voice low enough that passing colleagues couldn't hear. You've seemed distant today. Just tired, she replied, focusing on shutting down her computer rather than meeting his gaze. It's been a busy week. He hesitated, then reached out to brush his fingers lightly against hers, a subtle gesture of affection they sometimes allowed themselves in the office. Call me later? Even just to say goodnight? The genuine concern in his voice made her falter. This was the Ethan she'd fallen for. Thoughtful, attentive, the man who looked at her as though she were a miracle he couldn't quite believe was real. How could she reconcile that man with the one who had hired her out of guilt and obligation? Sure, she said, the promise empty even as she made it. That evening, after helping Lily with her solar system diorama and tucking her into bed, Sophie curled on the sofa with her phone in hand. 5 missed texts from Ethan glowed on the screen. How's the project coming along? Lily modeling Neptune by any chance? Her favorite, as I recall. Just checking in. Hope everything's okay. Sophie? Starting to worry, just let me know you're all right. The progression from casual to concerned made her chest ache. Part of her wanted to call him, to hear his voice and let his warmth melt the ice forming around her heart. But another part, the part that had survived James's betrayal, that had learned to stand alone rather than be diminished, held her back. She typed a brief response. Sorry, busy night. Project finished. We're fine. Talk tomorrow. His reply came instantly. You're sure everything's okay? Sophie stared at his message, tears prickling behind her eyes. Was anything okay? The man she'd been falling in love with, the man she'd begun to trust with her heart, with Lily's affections, had concealed the truth about how their relationship began. Every interaction they'd had was now cast in shadow, every tender moment potentially motivated by guilt rather than genuine feeling. Just tired, she texted back. Good night, Ethan. She turned off her phone before he could respond, unwilling to risk her resolve crumbling at the sight of more concerned messages. Curling deeper into the sofa, Sophie wrapped her arms around herself, trying to fill the space that had so recently been occupied by Ethan's embrace. The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, matching Sophie's mood as she prepared for work. She moved through her routine mechanically, making Lily's lunch and helping her dress while her mind circled relentlessly around Victor's words. PR move or guilty conscience. Damage control. Mommy, is Uncle Ethan coming for movie night tomorrow? Lily asked as they walked to the bus stop, her unicorn umbrella bobbing cheerfully against the rain. The innocent question pierced Sophie's heart. Lily had grown so attached to Ethan over these past months. His patient attention, his genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams. Was that too a form of obligation? A way to ingratiate himself with the mother by charming the child? I'm not sure, sweetheart, Sophie hedged. He might be busy with work. Lily's face fell momentarily before brightening again. Well, he promised to help me with my science fair project next week. He knows all about rockets. Sophie managed a smile that felt brittle on her face. We'll see, okay? The bus is coming. Be good at school today. After watching Lily board the bus, Sophie made her way to the subway, rehearsing the professional demeanor she would need to maintain at the office. Whatever personal turmoil churned within her, she remained Ethan's executive assistant, a role she had earned through her capabilities, regardless of why he'd initially offered it. At least she hoped she had earned it. Ethan Stone stared unseeing at the financial reports spread across his desk, his mind elsewhere. Something was wrong with Sophie. Had been wrong since yesterday morning. The change had been so abrupt it was almost dizzying. One day she'd been relaxed and happy in his arms, her eyes soft with an emotion he dared to believe was love. The next, she'd withdrawn behind a wall so polite and professional it made his teeth ache. He'd reviewed every conversation, every interaction, searching for a misstep that might have caused this sudden frost. Had the discussion of future plans frightened her? Had he pushed too hard, moved too fast? Or was it something else entirely? Something he couldn't see from his position of privilege? The intercom buzzed. Mr. Stone, your 9:30 is here, came Sophie's voice, perfectly modulated, utterly devoid of the warmth he'd grown accustomed to. Send them in, he replied, equally formal. Through the glass partition, he watched her rise from her desk, her movements graceful but constrained. Gone was the easy smile she usually greeted him with each morning, replaced by a carefully neutral expression that revealed nothing of her thoughts. The meeting passed in a blur, Ethan contributing enough to appear engaged while his mind circled the mystery of Sophie's withdrawal. When it ended, he asked her to stay behind. Is there something else you need, Mr. Stone? She asked, standing before his desk with her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. The formal address, one they rarely used in private anymore, felt like a slap. Sophie, what's going on? I'm not sure what you mean, she replied, her gaze fixed somewhere over his left shoulder. You've been different since yesterday, Ethan said, keeping his voice gentle despite the frustration building in his chest. Cold, distant. Did I do something to upset you? For a moment, something flickered in her expression. A flash of hurt quickly masked. Nothing's wrong. I've just been tired. Look at me, he said softly. Please. She did finally, and what he saw in her eyes made his heart sink. A guarded wariness he hadn't seen since their earliest encounters, when she'd viewed him as nothing more than a difficult boss with the power to disrupt her life. Whatever it is, he continued when she remained silent, we can talk about it. Fix it. Sophie's lips pressed into a thin line. There's nothing to fix, Ethan. I just need some space to think. About what? He pressed, rising from his desk to approach her. About us? She took a subtle step back, maintaining the distance between them. Yes, about a lot of things. Has this got something to do with Claudia? With what you overheard at the gala? The possibility had been gnawing at him, that Sophie's insecurities about their different worlds had finally overwhelmed her. No, she said too quickly. It's not about Claudia. Ethan studied her face, searching for clues in the subtle tightening around her eyes, the slight tension in her jaw. Then what? Sophie, I can't fix what I don't understand. For a heartbeat, he thought she might tell him. Something shifted in her expression, a fracture in the careful mask she'd constructed. But then her professional composure reasserted itself. I have the quarterly reports to finish before lunch, she said, retreating toward the door. And you have a call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. Sophie, he began, but she was already gone, the door closing with a quiet click that somehow sounded like finality. Ethan returned to his desk, frustration and confusion warring within him. He'd faced down corporate rivals, navigated hostile takeovers, built an empire from nothing. Yet he found himself utterly at a loss when confronted with the gentle withdrawal of the woman he'd come to need more than his next breath. Whatever had happened, whatever had changed, he would find out. Sophie Winters had become too important, to his happiness, to his very sense of self, to let her slip away without a fight. But first, he needed to understand what exactly he was fighting against. As he prepared for his call with Tokyo, Ethan made a silent promise to himself. He would discover what had caused Sophie's sudden retreat. And when he did, he would move heaven and earth to make it right. Chapter 21. Broken Hearts and Harsh Words. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan's office, the spring storm matching the tempest brewing inside Sophie's chest. The hour was late, nearly 8, with the executive floor empty save for the security guard making his rounds. She'd spent 3 days in emotional limbo, moving through her duties like an automaton while her heart splintered with each passing hour. Tonight, she couldn't bear it any longer. The constant ache, the pretending, the hollow smiles that never reached her eyes. It had to end. The documents in her hand felt impossibly heavy. Her resignation letter, printed on crisp company letterhead. 2 weeks' notice, professionally worded, citing personal reasons for her departure. Nothing about betrayal. Nothing about falling in love with a man who had seen her as a charity case. Nothing about how completely her heart was breaking. Sophie had waited until Ethan's last meeting ended, watching through the glass wall as executives filed out one by one. Now he sat alone, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the stormy skyline as he reviewed reports in the golden glow of his desk lamp. Even now, knowing what she knew, the sight of him made her breath catch, a visceral reminder of all she was about to lose. She knocked softly on the open door. Ethan looked up, the weariness in his expression giving way to hopeful warmth that nearly undid her resolve. Sophie, he said, her name a benediction on his lips. I was beginning to think you'd left for the day. We need to talk, she replied, closing the door behind her. The soft click sounded like finality. Something in her tone made Ethan set aside his tablet, giving her his full attention. I've been hoping you'd say that, he said carefully. You've been distant lately. I've been thinking, Sophie said, remaining standing despite his gesture toward the chair opposite his desk. She needed the advantage of height, needed to hold on to her righteous hurt before the magnetic pull of him weakened her resolve. About us, about how this all started. Ethan's expression shifted, caution creeping in. What do you mean? I overheard you and Victor the other day, she said, the words feeling like glass in her throat. Talking about why you hired me, about damage control and PR moves and guilty consciences. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes, followed swiftly by concern. Sophie, whatever you think you heard. I know what I heard, she interrupted, her voice wavering despite her best efforts. You didn't hire me because you saw potential in me. You hired me because you felt guilty for getting me fired. Because it was bad PR to have the heartless CEO throwing a single mother out on the street. Ethan rose from his chair, moving around the desk toward her. That's not... Don't, Sophie said, taking a step back. Please don't touch me right now. I need to say this. He froze, pain flashing across his features before he nodded, returning to lean against his desk, rather than approaching her further. I've been such a fool, Sophie continued, hating the tremor in her voice. Thinking this was real. Thinking you saw me, really saw me. Not just some charity case you could rescue to make yourself feel better. Is that what you think? Ethan's voice was low, controlled, but she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. That these past months have been what? Some extended guilt trip? A PR stunt? I don't know what to think anymore, Sophie admitted, her hands tightening around the resignation letter. I just know that everything started with a lie. You never told me the real reason you offered me this job. Because it wasn't relevant, Ethan countered, frustration edging into his tone. Yes, I felt responsible for your situation. Yes, I suggested the position partly to make things right. But Sophie, he ran a hand through his hair in agitation. The moment you started working here, you proved yourself a dozen times over. The job ceased being about guilt the first week you were here. And us? Sophie asked, the question burning in her chest. Was that about guilt too? About making the poor single mom feel special? About being the hero in your own redemption story? Anger flashed in Ethan's eyes. Not cold corporate displeasure, but genuine hurt. How can you ask me that, after everything we've shared? How can I not? Sophie countered, tears threatening despite her determination to remain composed. I've spent my entire adult life fighting to be seen as capable, as independent. Not someone to be pitied or rescued. And now I find out that's exactly how this all began, with you swooping in to fix the mess you made of my life. That's not fair, Ethan said, his voice tightening. I never pitied you, Sophie. Not once. I admired you from the first moment you stood up to me in that restaurant. Your courage, your dignity. But you still felt responsible for me, she pressed. Like I was a problem you needed to solve. I felt responsible for the situation, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Sophie asked bitterly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like everything. The job, the relationship, all of it. Started because the great Ethan Stone couldn't bear the weight of his conscience. Something shifted in Ethan's expression then. A hardening. A withdrawal that made Sophie's heart constrict despite her anger. You've made up your mind about this, haven't you? He said quietly. No matter what I say, you've already decided that I couldn't possibly have genuine feelings for you. I want to believe you, Sophie whispered, her resolve cracking. But how can I? How do I separate what's real from what began as obligation? Ethan pushed away from the desk, pacing the length of the rain-streaked windows with contained energy. Do you think I make a habit of this? He asked, his voice sharp with frustration. Offering jobs to every waitress I encounter? Getting involved with my employees? Opening my life, my heart to someone who could hurt me? I don't know, Sophie said. I don't know you as well as I thought I did. The words landed like a blow. Ethan turned to face her, his expression raw with pain. That's not true. And you know it. You know me better than anyone has in years. Then why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? Sophie demanded. Why let me believe you hired me purely on merit when it was really about assuaging your guilt? Because by the time it mattered, by the time we were more than employer and employee, it wasn't about guilt anymore. Ethan's control slipped, his voice rising with emotion. It was about you, Sophie. Your brilliance, your compassion, the way you see the world, the way you made me feel alive again. The sincerity in his voice made Sophie falter, doubt creeping into her certainty. But the memory of Victor's words, PR move or guilty conscience, hardened her resolve. I need to know, she said, meeting his gaze directly. I need to know if any of this was real, or if I've just been part of some elaborate attempt to prove to yourself that you're not the cold-hearted CEO everyone thinks you are. Ethan stared at her, disbelief and hurt warring in his expression. How can you ask me that, after everything we've shared? Because I need to hear you say it, Sophie insisted, that this wasn't about guilt or obligation or fixing the mess you made of my life. It wasn't, Ethan said firmly. Perhaps it started that way, with me feeling responsible for your situation. But Sophie, what developed between us was entirely separate from that. It was real. It is real. The slight hesitation before his correction, the admission that it had indeed begun with guilt, pierced Sophie's heart like a blade. So I was right, she said softly. It did start with pity. Not pity, Ethan countered, frustration evident in his voice. Responsibility. There's a difference. Is there? Sophie asked, blinking back tears. Because from where I'm standing, they look remarkably similar. Poor Sophie, the single mom who needed rescuing. That's not how I see you, Ethan insisted, taking a step toward her. I see you as brilliant, capable, stronger than anyone I've ever known. You've never needed rescuing, Sophie. That's what makes you so extraordinary. The genuine admiration in his voice made her waver. What if she was wrong? What if she was throwing away something real because of her own insecurities, her own fears of being seen as less than? But then she remembered Claudia's dismissive glance, the whispers at work, the subtle ways the world had made clear that someone like her didn't belong with someone like him. And worse, the knowledge that their entire relationship had begun because he'd felt responsible for her welfare. I can't do this, she said finally, extending the letter she'd been clutching. I can't keep wondering if every kind word, every gesture was motivated by guilt rather than genuine feeling. I can't be your project, Ethan. He stared at the envelope, making no move to take it. What is this? My resignation, Sophie said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Effective immediately. I've prepared transition notes for my replacement. You're quitting. The words fell like stones between them. I'm moving on, Sophie corrected. Surely you understand why I can't stay. Ethan's expression hardened, a glimpse of the formidable CEO emerging from behind the vulnerable man she'd come to love. So that's it? You've decided I'm lying about my feelings and now you're running away? I'm protecting myself, Sophie countered, stung by his characterization. And Lily, from getting any more invested in something that was built on a foundation of guilt and obligation. Damn it, Sophie. Ethan's control finally broke, his voice sharp with frustration. This isn't about guilt. This is about me falling in love with you despite every protective instinct I have. Despite knowing how it would complicate both our lives. Despite the gossiping and the questioning, and yes, despite the awkward way it began. The words hung in the air between them, the first time either had spoken of love aloud. Under other circumstances, the declaration might have filled Sophie with joy. Now, it only twisted the knife deeper. If you truly loved me, she said softly, you would have been honest from the start. You would have given me the dignity of knowing exactly why I was being offered this position. And if you truly loved me, Ethan countered, his voice rough with emotion, you'd trust that my feelings for you are genuine, regardless of how we met. The impasse stretched between them like a chasm, neither willing to cross to the other's position. Maybe we were fooling ourselves, Sophie said finally. Maybe two people from worlds as different as ours were never meant to make it work. Is that what this is really about? Ethan asked, his gaze piercing. Not the job offer, but the fact that I have money and you don't? Are you using this as an excuse to run away because you're afraid you don't belong in my world? The accusation hit too close to the bone, igniting Sophie's defensive anger. Don't you dare make this about my insecurities. This is about you lying to me, about discovering our entire relationship is built on a foundation of guilt and pity. It is not built on pity. Ethan's voice rose to match hers, It's built on respect and admiration. And yes, Sophie, on love. Love that apparently isn't strong enough to overcome your determination to see the worst in my intentions. How am I supposed to see anything else when you've admitted you hired me out of guilt? Sophie demanded, tears finally spilling over. When I have to wonder if every moment between us was tainted by that initial motivation? Because I'm telling you it wasn't. Ethan's composure cracked completely, raw emotion bleeding through. I'm standing here, asking you to believe me when I say that whatever complicated reasons brought you into my life, I fell in love with you because of who you are, not because of what I did or didn't do for you. The plea in his voice nearly broke her resolve. For a heartbeat, Sophie wavered, wanting desperately to believe him, to fall into his arms and let his certainty wash away her doubts. But the voice of experience, of hard-won independence, whispered caution. She'd trusted before, with James, and had her heart shattered. She'd believed in fairy tales once, only to wake up to the harsh reality of single motherhood and financial struggle. Could she risk that again, knowing their relationship had been born of guilt and obligation? I want to believe you, she whispered, but I don't know if I can. Ethan's expression shifted, hurt giving way to a resigned anger that chilled Sophie to the bone. Then there's nothing more to say, is there? He said, his voice terrifyingly calm. If you're determined to believe the worst of me, of us, then perhaps you're right to leave. The words struck like physical blows. Sophie had expected him to fight harder, to refuse her resignation, to insist they could work through this. His capitulation confirmed her deepest fear, that whatever had been between them wasn't strong enough to survive this revelation. I guess not, she managed, placing the envelope on his desk when he still made no move to take it. She unclipped her company ID from her blazer and set it beside the letter, the small sound impossibly loud in the tense silence. Ethan watched her, his expression now carefully blank, the mask of the CEO fully restored, hiding the man she'd come to love. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you were the best executive assistant I've ever had. I'll ensure you receive an excellent reference. The formal words, so at odds with the intimacy they'd shared, broke something inside Sophie. Is that all I was to you? A good assistant? You know that's not true, Ethan replied, a flash of the real man visible beneath the corporate veneer. But since you've made it clear you don't trust anything else I might say about what you meant to me, I thought I'd offer something you might actually believe. The bitterness in his tone made Sophie flinch. Ethan, Ms. Winters, he corrected, the formality like a wall slamming down between them. I believe we've said all there is to say. You've submitted your resignation. I've accepted it. Our business is concluded. Sophie stared at him, searching for some sign of the warm, vulnerable man who had held her through the night, who had played with her daughter and shown her a world of possibilities. But all she saw was Ethan Stone, CEO, remote, controlled, untouchable. Goodbye then, she said softly, gathering the last shreds of her dignity around her like armor. I hope you find what you're looking for. I thought I had, he replied, so quietly she almost missed it. With those words hanging in the air between them, Sophie turned and walked out of his office, out of his life. The soft click of the door closing behind her felt like the period at the end of a sentence. Final, irrevocable. In the empty hallway, away from his gaze, she allowed herself a moment of weakness. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed against the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. The ache in her chest was physical, as though something vital had been torn away, leaving a ragged hole where her heart should be. How had it come to this? How had something that felt so right, so perfect, shattered so completely? Inside his office, Ethan stood motionless, staring at the closed door as though he could will Sophie to return through sheer force of will. The resignation letter on his desk, crisp white paper folded precisely, seemed to mock him with its finality. He should have fought harder. Should have made her understand that whatever complicated circumstances had brought her into his life, what had grown between them was genuine. Should have found the words to breach the walls of hurt and mistrust she'd erected. Instead, he'd let pride and pain dictate his response, retreating behind his CEO persona rather than laying his heart bare one last time. Because the truth was, Sophie's lack of faith in his feelings had cut deeper than any business betrayal ever could. If she could believe he'd fabricated an entire relationship out of guilt and obligation, did she truly know him at all? The Sophie he loved, the Sophie he'd thought loved him, would have given him the chance to explain, would have trusted that their connection transcended its awkward beginning. Rain continued to lash against the windows, the storm outside mirroring the devastation within. Ethan picked up Sophie's company ID, running his thumb over the small plastic card that had granted her access to his professional world. But it was his heart she'd truly accessed. His carefully guarded, long-isolated heart that now lay in ruins. He sank into his chair, the weight of loss pressing down on him with crushing force. For the first time in years, since the deaths of his parents, Ethan Stone felt the sting of tears. Not for the assistant he'd lost, but for the future that had slipped through his fingers. A future of warmth and laughter, of family dinners and bedtime stories, of belonging to something greater than his own ambition. A future with Sophie and Lily that now would never be. Chapter 22. Apart and Adrift. The dinner rush at Benny's diner swirled around Sophie in a chaos of clattering plates and overlapping conversations. 2 weeks had passed since she'd walked out of Stone Innovations. 2 weeks of forcing smiles for customers while her heart sat like a stone in her chest. "Order up for table 7, Benny called from the kitchen window. Sophie gathered the plates with practiced efficiency, balancing them along her arm as she had countless times before. The familiarity of waitressing should have been comforting, a return to solid ground after months of emotional turbulence. Instead, it felt like moving backward, as though the Sophie who had flourished in Ethan's world had been nothing but a beautiful dream. "Everything look good here?" she asked table 7, setting down their orders with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The elderly couple nodded, and Sophie moved on to her next table, going through motions that required no thought, leaving her mind dangerously free to wander where it shouldn't. To a penthouse with city views, to tender moments in the quiet hours of night, to gray eyes that had looked at her as though she were something precious. "You're a million miles away again," Mara, the other waitress on shift, murmured as they passed each other. "That's the second time you've refilled the sugar canisters today." Sophie glanced down at the container in her hands, surprised to find it already full. "Sorry, I'm a little distracted." "A little?" Mara raised an eyebrow. "You've been walking around like a zombie for 2 weeks. Whatever happened with that fancy job of yours must have been brutal." "It's fine," Sophie replied automatically. "I'm fine." Mara's skeptical look made it clear she wasn't convinced, but she didn't press further. The bell above the door jingled, announcing new customers, and Sophie was grateful for the distraction. The rest of her shift passed in the same fog that had enveloped her since the night of her fight with Ethan. Each time the bell rang, some traitorous part of her heart leapt with hope that it might be him, coming to find her, to explain, to fight for what they'd had. But it never was. By closing time, Sophie's feet ached and her forced smile had become a grimace. She counted her tips mechanically. Decent, but nowhere near what she'd earned at Stone Innovations. The financial cushion she'd built during her months there would sustain them for a while, but reality was already pressing in. Rent, Lily's school expenses, the medical bills from her asthma attack that were still trickling in. "Need a ride home?" Mara asked as they hung up their aprons. Sophie shook her head. "Thanks, but Mrs. Patterson from next door is watching Lily. I should hurry back." The night air held the gentle warmth of late spring as Sophie made her way through familiar streets to her apartment building. The neighborhood that had once felt like home now seemed somehow diminished, as though seeing a wider world had changed her perception of this small corner of it. She unlocked her door quietly, finding Mrs. Patterson dozing on the sofa with a romance novel open on her lap. The older woman startled awake at Sophie's entrance. "She went down like an angel," Mrs. Patterson reported, gathering her things. "Finished her homework and everything. Such a good girl." "Thank you for watching her," Sophie said, walking her neighbor to the door. "I appreciate it more than I can say." Anytime, dear. Though she did ask about that man again. The one with the nice suits? Said she missed him helping with her science project. The casual observation pierced Sophie's heart like a physical pain. I'll talk to her, she managed. After Mrs. Patterson left, Sophie moved quietly to Lily's bedroom, easing the door open to check on her sleeping daughter. Moonlight spilled across Lily's peaceful face, her stuffed octopus, the one Ethan had won for her at Wonderworld, clutched tightly in her arms. The sight broke something inside Sophie. She retreated to her own room before the tears could fall, closing the door so Lily wouldn't hear. Only then did she allow herself to crumple onto the edge of her bed, hands pressed against her mouth to muffle the sobs that racked her body. She'd done the right thing, hadn't she? Walking away from a relationship built on obligation and guilt. Yet, if it had been the right choice, why did it feel like she'd torn out her own heart and left it behind in that sleek office with its rain-streaked windows? When the tears finally subsided, Sophie changed into her pajamas with mechanical movements, her body heavy with exhaustion. On her nightstand sat a framed photo of Lily laughing in the butterfly garden. Ethan crouched beside her with a matching smile of wonder, as a monarch perched delicately on his extended finger. Sophie turned the frame face down, unable to bear the sight of so much happiness now lost. Across the city, lights still burned in the top-floor office of Stone Innovations. Ethan stood at the windows, staring unseeing at the glittering cityscape below. The same view he'd shared with Sophie that first night of the gala, when she'd looked out with such unguarded wonder at a world previously closed to her. "Sir, the Beijing contracts are ready for your review." Ethan turned to find his new assistant, Martin, efficient and proper and utterly lacking Sophie's warmth, standing in the doorway with a stack of documents. "Leave them," Ethan replied, his voice clipped. "I'll get to them in the morning." "It's already morning, sir," Martin pointed out gently. "Almost 1 a.m. Ethan glanced at his watch with mild surprise. The hours had begun to blur together, days bleeding into nights as he threw himself into work with singular focus. Anything to keep from thinking about what he had lost. "Then I'll review them at a more reasonable hour," he amended. "Go home, Martin." "Yes, sir." Martin hesitated. "Will you be leaving soon as well?" The gentle concern in the question reminded Ethan uncomfortably of Sophie, who would have simply stated, "You're working too hard, Ethan," with that mix of exasperation and affection he'd come to rely on. "Shortly," he lied, turning back to the window. When the door closed behind Martin, Ethan's professional mask slipped, revealing the exhaustion beneath. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, of replaying their final argument endlessly, analyzing each word spoken in anger. 2 weeks of walking past Sophie's empty desk, of attending meetings where her absence felt like a physical void beside him. He moved to his desk, sinking into the chair and rubbing his eyes. The office felt cavernous and cold despite the climate control maintaining a perfect temperature. Before Sophie, he'd never noticed the sterility of the space. Now, it seemed to echo with all that was missing. His gaze fell on his bottom desk drawer, the one he'd deliberately kept closed for the past 2 weeks. With a mixture of dread and longing, he pulled it open. Inside lay the mementos he couldn't bear to discard yet couldn't stand to see. Lily's drawing of the 3 of them beneath a rainbow. The small stuffed fox he'd won for Sophie at Wonderworld. A candid photo Julia had taken at the charity gala, capturing Sophie mid-laugh. Her head tilted toward Ethan with an intimacy that made his chest ache to look at now. He picked up the fox, its soft fur slightly matted where his fingers had worried it during late nights alone in this office. The toy had remained on Sophie's desk until her abrupt departure, a cheerful reminder of their day together. Ethan had retrieved it afterward, unable to leave it for the janitorial staff to discard. "You're a sentimental fool, Stone," he muttered to himself, returning the fox to the drawer and pushing it firmly shut. The truth was, he'd handled everything wrong. He'd let his pride overrule his heart when Sophie confronted him, retreating behind corporate coldness rather than fighting for what they had. The memory of her face as she placed her resignation letter on his desk, hurt and resolute and so damn brave, haunted his dreams. His phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Just saw the light still on in your office. Go home, man. Whatever crisis you're avoiding will still be there tomorrow." Ethan didn't bother to respond. Victor had been careful not to mention Sophie directly since her departure, but his concern was evident in these small gestures. Checking in, suggesting dinners Ethan inevitably declined, watching him with worried eyes during meetings. The same concern had begun to appear in the faces of his executive team as Ethan's temper grew shorter, his demands more exacting. He knew he'd regressed to the cold, demanding CEO he'd been before Sophie entered his life. Perhaps become even worse, as the warmth she'd awakened in him curdled into bitterness in her absence. With a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, Ethan gathered his coat and briefcase. The penthouse awaited, equally empty, equally devoid of the joy that had briefly illuminated his life. But at least there he could pour himself a drink and pretend that the hollowness in his chest might eventually ease. Morning sunshine filtered through Sophie's kitchen window as she prepared Lily's lunch, carefully cutting the crusts off her peanut butter sandwich just the way she liked it. "Mommy, can we go to the park after school today?" Lily asked, spooning cereal into her mouth with one hand while coloring with the other. "Tyler says the ducklings hatched." "I think we can manage that," Sophie replied, summoning a smile for her daughter. In the 2 weeks since leaving Stone Innovations, she'd made a conscious effort to create special moments with Lily, as though trying to compensate for the hole Ethan's absence had left in both their lives. More stories at bedtime, impromptu picnics when the weather allowed, stopping for ice cream on the way home from school. Small indulgences that strained her reduced budget, but soothed her guilty conscience. "Can we invite Uncle Ethan?" Lily asked, her innocent question landing like a physical blow. "He said he's never fed ducks before. Remember?" Sophie stilled, the memory washing over her unbidden. Ethan confessing during a lazy Sunday breakfast that there were so many simple childhood pleasures he'd never experienced with his distant parents. Lily had been appalled, immediately listing all the essential activities they needed to show him, feeding ducks chief among them. "Uncle Ethan is very busy with work, sweetheart," Sophie managed, the familiar excuse tasting bitter on her tongue. "He's always busy," Lily sighed dramatically. "But he said he'd make time for important things. And ducks are important, Mommy." "Yes, they are," Sophie agreed, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. "But sometimes sometimes things change, Lily." Her daughter looked up with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through adult evasions. "Did you and Uncle Ethan have a fight?" The directness of the question caught Sophie off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you're sad all the time now," Lily replied matter-of-factly. "And Uncle Ethan doesn't come over anymore. And you put the picture of us at the butterfly place face down." Sophie abandoned the lunch preparation and moved to sit beside her daughter, heart heavy with the realization that her attempts to shield Lily from her pain had failed. "Yes, we had a disagreement," she admitted. "Sometimes, even when grown-ups care about each other, they don't see things the same way." "Can't you just say sorry?" Lily asked, the simple solution of a child making Sophie's eyes sting with unshed tears. "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." "Grown-ups always say that," Lily muttered, returning to her coloring with a frown. "But Miss Davis says most problems get smaller when people talk about them." Out of the mouths of babes, Sophie thought, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't express. If only adult relationships could be mended as easily as childhood squabbles, with simple apologies and fresh starts. But how could she explain to her 7-year-old that some wounds cut too deep for easy healing? That trust, once broken, was as difficult to repair as a shattered mirror? That sometimes love wasn't enough to bridge the chasms that opened between two people from different worlds? "We should get going or you'll be late for school," Sophie said instead, returning to pack Lily's lunch with hands that trembled slightly. As they walked to the bus stop, Lily's small hand warm in hers, Sophie found herself wondering what Ethan was doing at that exact moment. Was he in his sleek office, focused on the empire he'd built, their brief connection already fading from his memory? Or did he, like her, find himself ambushed by remembrances at unexpected moments, the scent of vanilla reminding him of her preferred coffee. A child's laughter echoing Lily's. The sight of the carousel in the park recalling their day at Wonderworld. She hoped, with a generosity that surprised her, that he was healing better than she was. That at least one of them might find their way back to wholeness after what they'd broken together. Chapter 23. Love Remains Rain tapped against Sophie's bedroom window, a gentle rhythm that should have been soothing. Instead, it only amplified the hollow ache in her chest. 3 weeks had passed since she'd walked away from Stone Enterprises and from Ethan. 3 weeks of going through motions, of forcing smiles for Lily's sake, of pretending her heart wasn't shattered into pieces too small to gather. Sophie rolled onto her side, her gaze falling on her nightstand where her phone sat dark and silent. Her fingers itched to reach for it, to scroll through old messages from Ethan that she couldn't bring herself to delete. Messages filled with thoughtful check-ins, inside jokes, and the quiet tenderness that had developed between them before everything fell apart. "This is pathetic," she whispered to the empty room, pushing herself upright. Moonlight spilled through the curtains, illuminating the small stuffed dragon that Lily had insisted on giving her, because you miss Mr. Stone and dragons make everything better. The sight of it brought a fresh wave of pain. Even her 6-year-old had noticed how hollow she'd become. Sophie padded to the living room, careful not to wake Lily. The apartment felt different at night. Too quiet, too empty. She curled into the corner of her sofa, wrapping herself in the throw blanket that still faintly smelled of Ethan's cologne from the last movie night they'd shared. On the coffee table lay her economics textbook, open to the chapter on sustainable business models. She'd been trying to study for hours, but the words blurred together, her mind constantly drifting to memories of Ethan quizzing her on financial concepts, his eyes warming with pride when she grasped complex theories. "Stop it," she scolded herself, closing the book with more force than necessary. But stopping was impossible. Ethan had become woven into the fabric of her life, into Lily's life, in ways she hadn't fully appreciated until he was gone. The coffee shop where he'd first surprised her with lunch. The park bench where they'd watched Lily chase butterflies. The quiet moments in his office when the world outside seemed to disappear. Sophie reached for her phone, scrolling to the last text he'd sent 2 weeks ago. "I miss you. Both of you. Please talk to me." She'd never replied. What could she say? That she missed him too? That she woke reaching for him in the night? That sometimes she caught herself turning to share a thought with him, only to remember he wasn't there? Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, but pride and fear held her back. What if Victor had been right? What if everything had been built on guilt and obligation rather than genuine feeling? Yet in the stillness of night, doubt crept in. The memory of Ethan's face when she'd handed him her resignation, the raw pain in his eyes, so at odds with his usual composed demeanor, haunted her. Had she been too hasty? Too quick to assume the worst? Sophie set the phone down without typing a message. Morning would bring clarity, she told herself. Morning always did. But as rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, Sophie knew with bone-deep certainty that no amount of mornings would heal this particular wound. Across town, in his penthouse apartment, Ethan Stone stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the same rain pattern against glass. The city sprawled below him, a tapestry of lights against darkness, but he saw none of it. His mind was elsewhere. In a small apartment across town, with a woman whose absence had left a void no amount of work could fill. The whiskey in his glass remained untouched. He'd poured it more out of habit than desire, the ritual a poor substitute for the evenings he'd spent with Sophie and Lily, where laughter had replaced the silence that now surrounded him. His phone buzzed on the desk behind him. Ethan turned, hope flaring briefly before reality extinguished it. Not Sophie, just another email notification. The disappointment was a familiar companion these days. He moved to his desk where blueprints for the Children's Community Center lay spread across the surface. The project had been Sophie's idea originally, converting an abandoned building in her neighborhood into a space where working parents could access affordable after-school care. She'd mentioned it casually one evening, unaware that her words had planted a seed that had grown into one of Stone Enterprises' most meaningful initiatives. Now the project continued without her, though her influence remained in every detail. From the sunny reading nooks to the scholarship program for single parents pursuing education. Ethan traced the outline of the building with his finger, remembering Sophie's face when he'd first shown her the preliminary designs. The way her eyes had widened, then softened with emotion. The way she'd whispered, "You were really listening," as if surprised that her ideas mattered to him. Of course they had mattered. She had mattered. Still mattered, despite her belief that his interest had been born solely from guilt. "Damn it, Sophie," he muttered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Why won't you let me explain?" His sister Diana had called him stubborn earlier that day when he'd refused to discuss the situation during their weekly video call. "You're both miserable," she'd pointed out with characteristic bluntness. "And for what? Pride? Fear? Life's too short, Ethan." She was right, of course. But how could he make Sophie understand that while responsibility might have opened the door, it was her strength, her kindness, her unflinching honesty, that had made him fall in love? Ethan's gaze fell on a framed drawing propped against his desk lamp. Lily's dragon with the blue fire. He'd had it professionally framed the day after she'd given it to him, touched by the child's unguarded affection. Now it served as a daily reminder of what he'd lost. Not just Sophie, but the chance at the family he'd never known he wanted until they'd shown him what he was missing. He picked up his phone, scrolling to Sophie's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button before he set it down again. She'd made her position clear. His calls went unanswered, his texts unacknowledged. The wall between them was of her construction, and he had no right to force his way through it. Yet as rain streaked down the windows of his empty penthouse, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't continue this way. Something had to change. He needed Sophie to understand that what had grown between them was real. Perhaps the only real thing in his carefully constructed life. An idea began to form, tentative at first, then gaining clarity. It was time to stop respecting barriers and start fighting for what mattered. For who mattered. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt the fog of despair lifting. He had a plan now, and Ethan Stone never failed when he set his mind to something. "You look terrible," Kate announced cheerfully as she set a steaming mug of coffee in front of Sophie. Sophie glared at her friend across the kitchen table. "Thanks. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear on a Tuesday morning." Kate shrugged, unrepentant. "Just being honest. Those are some world-class dark circles you're sporting." She settled into the chair opposite Sophie, her expression softening. "Not sleeping?" "Not really," Sophie admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Lily had nightmares again last night." "About?" Sophie sighed. "Dragons leaving and never coming back." Understanding dawned in Kate's eyes. "Ah, not exactly subtle, is she?" "She misses him," Sophie said quietly. "She keeps asking when Ethan's coming back, and I don't know what to tell her." "You could try the truth," Kate suggested gently. "That you miss him too." Sophie stared into her coffee, avoiding her friend's knowing gaze. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" Kate leaned forward. "Look, I've listened to you go around in circles for weeks. He offered you a job out of guilt. He didn't tell you that was his motivation. You felt betrayed." "I get it." She paused, waiting until Sophie met her eyes. "But at some point, you have to ask yourself if punishing him and yourself is worth the cost." "I'm not punishing anyone," Sophie protested. "I'm protecting myself, protecting Lily." "From what? A man who clearly adores both of you?" Kate's voice remained gentle despite her challenging words. "Sophie, I was there when James walked out. I saw what it did to you." "But Ethan isn't James." "I know that," Sophie whispered. "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're so afraid of being hurt again that you're pushing away someone who might actually be worth the risk." Sophie's eyes stung with unshed tears. What if it was all just guilt? What if I was just his good deed? Oh, honey. Kate reached across the table to squeeze Sophie's hand. No man looks at his good deed the way Ethan looked at you at Lily's birthday party, like you hung the moon and stars. The memory of that day, Ethan helping Lily blow out her candles, his hand warm against Sophie's back, his smile softer than she'd ever seen it, sent a fresh wave of longing through her. He lied to me, Sophie said, but the words lacked conviction. Did he? Or did he just not tell you something that by the time it mattered wasn't relevant anymore? Kate tilted her head. Think about it, Soph. If he'd told you on day one, hey, I feel guilty about getting you fired, so here's a job. Would you have taken it? Or would your pride have sent you running? Sophie's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Kate continued. And by the time you two started falling for each other, maybe the beginning didn't matter so much anymore. Maybe what mattered was what you'd become to each other. When did you get so wise? Sophie asked, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I've always been wise. You've just been too stubborn to notice. Kate grinned, then grew serious again. Just think about it, okay? Life doesn't give us unlimited chances at happiness. Sometimes we have to be brave enough to grab them when they come. After Kate left for work, Sophie found herself standing in front of the refrigerator where Lily had proudly displayed her latest artwork, a family portrait featuring herself, Sophie, and a tall figure with dark hair who could only be Ethan. They were holding hands beneath a rainbow, surrounded by flowers and butterflies. My family, Lily had declared when she'd brought it home from school last week. The teacher's note in the corner read, "Draw the people who make you happy." Sophie traced the crayon outline of Ethan's figure, her heart constricting. Had she been too hasty? Too quick to assume the worst of a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect? The memory of their last conversation replayed in her mind. His frustrated insistence that while their relationship might have begun with guilt, it had grown into something real, something genuine. Perhaps it started that way, with me feeling responsible for your situation. But Sophie, what developed between us was entirely separate from that. It was real. It is real. She'd focused so intently on the first part of his statement that she'd dismissed the second. Had she been so afraid of being seen as a charity case that she'd missed the truth of his feelings? Sophie's phone buzzed with a text from her grandfather. Lunch today? Need your opinion on something important. She replied quickly, grateful for the distraction from her circling thoughts. Perhaps her grandfather's steady wisdom would bring clarity where her own tangled emotions could not. You're brooding again, Victor Reed observed, dropping a stack of contracts on Ethan's desk. It's becoming your default expression. Ethan glanced up from his computer, not bothering to deny the accusation. Did you bring the community center revisions? Right here. Victor extracted a folder from the stack. The contractor had some questions about the rooftop garden. I told him you'd call. I'll handle it. Ethan flipped through the documents, his focus already drifting back to the project that had consumed his attention for days. Victor settled into the chair across from Ethan's desk, making no move to leave. So, he said after a moment of pointed silence, are we going to talk about it? About what? Ethan asked, though he knew perfectly well what his friend meant. About the fact that you've been walking around like a ghost for weeks. About the fact that you check your phone every 5 minutes like a teenager waiting for a text. About Sophie. Ethan's jaw tightened. There's nothing to discuss. Bullshit. Victor's blunt assessment cut through Ethan's practiced indifference. You're miserable. She's probably miserable too. And it's all because of a misunderstanding that could be cleared up if either of you would swallow your pride for 5 minutes. It's not about pride, Ethan countered, setting down the folder. She made her position clear. She believes I saw her as a charity case, as a responsibility. Nothing I said could convince her otherwise. So you're just giving up? Victor's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. That doesn't sound like the Ethan Stone I know. The man who built an empire from nothing. The man who never takes no for an answer. This is different. Ethan said quietly. I can't force her to believe me. No, but you can show her. Victor leaned forward, his expression earnest. Look, I've known you since business school. I've seen you negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at Sophie, like she matters more than all of it. Ethan remained silent, unable to deny the truth of his friend's words. And for what it's worth, Victor continued, I think I owe you an apology. My conversation with her that day, I didn't realize she was within earshot. I never meant to imply that your feelings weren't genuine. You were just stating facts as you understood them, Ethan said, absently straightening papers on his desk. The job offer did begin as a way to make amends. But that's not where it ended, Victor pointed out. Anyone with eyes could see that. Anyone except Sophie, apparently. Ethan couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Fear makes people blind sometimes, Victor said with unexpected gentleness, especially people who've been hurt before. Ethan looked up sharply. What do you mean? I did some background research when you first hired her, Victor admitted. Standard procedure for executive-level assistants. Her ex, Lily's father, walked out when she was pregnant. No child support, no contact. Just gone. Understanding dawned, pieces clicking into place. Sophie's fierce independence, her reluctance to accept help, her deep-seated fear that she was being pitied rather than valued. She thinks I'm going to leave too, Ethan said slowly, that I never really wanted her in the first place. Seems likely. Victor stood, gathering his briefcase. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? Ethan's gaze drifted to the framed dragon drawing, then back to his friend. Something I should have done weeks ago. The assisted living facility's dining room was quieter than usual, most residents having finished their lunch hour. Sophie's grandfather sat across from her, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of tea, his keen eyes missing nothing of her subdued demeanor. You still haven't talked to him, he observed, not a question but a statement of fact. Sophie sighed, unsurprised by his perception. No. And you're still miserable. I'm fine, Grandpa, she insisted, pushing salad around her plate. Just tired. Lily had nightmares again. About the dragon? At Sophie's surprised look, he chuckled. She tells me everything during our chess games. That child has quite the imagination, and quite the attachment to your Mr. Stone. He's not my Mr. Stone, Sophie corrected automatically. Isn't he, though? Her grandfather set down his mug, his expression turning serious. Sophie, do you remember what I told you after James left? When you were convinced you'd never trust anyone again? Sophie nodded, the memory still clear despite the years that had passed. You said that one person's betrayal doesn't define everyone else's capacity for loyalty. Exactly. He reached across the table to pat her hand. Just because James saw you as disposable doesn't mean Ethan does. Just because your mother walked away doesn't mean everyone will. The gentle reference to her childhood wound, her mother's abandonment when Sophie was barely older than Lily, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. It's not the same situation, isn't it? You're so afraid of being left that you're leaving first. Her grandfather's voice remained kind despite the challenging words. You're so afraid of being someone's obligation that you can't recognize when you're someone's choice. Sophie blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. He didn't tell me the truth about why he hired me. And if he had? If he'd said, I feel responsible for your situation, let me help? Would you have accepted? No, she admitted quietly. I would have seen it as charity. Precisely. Her grandfather nodded. Sometimes people who care about us have to find roundabout ways to help because we're too stubborn to accept the direct approach. Sophie managed a watery smile. Are you calling me stubborn? Determined, he corrected with a wink. Like your grandmother. She turned me down 3 times before agreeing to marry me, you know. Said she didn't want to be just another conquest. I didn't know that, Sophie said, surprised. Oh yes, stubborn as they come. His eyes grew distant with memory, but worth every moment of persistence. 52 years together, and I never regretted a single day of the chase. He reached into his pocket, extracting a small velvet box that he placed on the table between them. This is what I wanted your opinion on. Sophie opened it carefully to find her grandmother's engagement ring, a delicate band of white gold supporting a modest diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. Grandma's ring, she whispered. She wanted you to have it, he said simply. When the time was right. When you found someone worthy of your heart. Grandpa, I can't. You can. He interrupted gently. And you should. Not necessarily for Ethan, though I must say, I've never seen you light up around anyone the way you do when you speak of him. But for someone, someday. Sophie closed the box carefully, emotion tightening her throat. Thank you. Just promise me something. Her grandfather said, his eyes suddenly serious. Don't let fear make your decisions for you. Fear is a poor compass, Sophie. It will always lead you away from what might hurt you, but also away from what might heal you. As Sophie drove home, her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Had fear been her compass these past weeks? Had she been so focused on protecting herself from potential pain that she'd inflicted certain pain instead? She thought of Ethan, not the powerful CEO in his tailored suits, but the man who had knelt to admire Lily's artwork. The man who had remembered how she took her coffee. The man who had held her through the night when she'd received news of her grandfather's minor heart scare, his strength unwavering when hers had faltered. Those weren't the actions of someone fulfilling an obligation. They were the actions of someone who cared, deeply, genuinely. As she waited at a red light, Sophie's gaze fell on a familiar building across the intersection, the abandoned community center that was being renovated. Construction equipment surrounded the site, workers in hard hats moving purposefully around scaffolding. On impulse, Sophie pulled into a nearby parking space, drawn by curiosity. She'd heard through Kate that Stone Enterprises had taken on the project, but she hadn't seen it for herself. A large sign stood at the entrance to the construction site. Future home of the Winters Community Center for Children and Families, a Stone Enterprises Foundation project. Sophie stared at the sign, her heart stuttering in her chest. Winters. He'd named it after her. Ma'am, can I help you? A construction foreman approached, clipboard in hand. I was just looking, Sophie managed, still processing the revelation. The Winters Community Center? Yes, ma'am. Named after the founder's inspiration, I'm told. The man consulted his clipboard. Are you with the foundation? We're expecting a representative to check the progress on the reading room and the scholarship office. Scholarship office? Sophie echoed. For single parents pursuing education, the foreman explained. It was a specific request from Mr. Stone himself. Said it was the heart of the whole project. Sophie thanked him and returned to her car, hands trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. The community center had been a passing comment she'd made months ago, a wishful thought about what her neighborhood needed. Ethan had not only remembered, he'd made it reality, and named it after her. That wasn't guilt. That wasn't obligation. That was love. The realization washed over her with the force of absolute certainty. Ethan loved her. Had probably loved her for months while she'd been too afraid to recognize it, too quick to assume the worst rather than believe she was worthy of his heart. Sophie reached for her phone, then hesitated. This wasn't a conversation for text messages or hurried phone calls. This required courage. The courage to face him directly, to admit her fears, to open herself to the possibility that what they'd shared had been real all along. With newfound determination, Sophie started her car. It was time to stop running from happiness out of fear it might someday end. Time to trust that some people stayed, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Time to fight for what mattered. Ethan adjusted his tie for the third time, an uncharacteristic nervousness tightening his chest. The rooftop garden of his penthouse had been transformed. Twinkling lights strung overhead, candles flickering in hurricane lamps, a small table set for an intimate dinner. The city skyline provided a backdrop of glittering lights against the deepening twilight. "Everything's ready, sir." Harrison, his driver and tonight impromptu assistant, informed him. "The chef will serve dinner whenever you give the word." "Thank you, Harrison." Ethan checked his watch. "And Mrs. Abernathy confirmed she'll stay with Lily as long as needed?" "Yes, sir." She seemed quite pleased about the arrangement. A hint of amusement colored Harrison's usually professional tone. "Said it was about time you two sorted yourselves out." Despite his nervousness, Ethan smiled. The elderly neighbor had made her opinion of the situation quite clear when he'd visited her earlier that day, calling both him and Sophie stubborn fools who deserve each other. "That will be all for now," Ethan said. "I'll call if we're ready for dinner." After Harrison departed, Ethan moved to the edge of the rooftop, gazing out at the city below. The plan had seemed perfect when he'd conceived it. Send Sophie a formal invitation to discuss the community center, arrange for Mrs. Abernathy to watch Lily, create a setting where they could talk without interruption. But now, as the moment approached, doubt crept in. What if she didn't come? What if she'd moved on? What if the damage was too great to repair? The sound of the elevator arriving interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Ethan turned, heart pounding, as the doors slid open. Sophie stepped onto the rooftop, momentarily halting at the sight before her. She wore a simple blue dress, the same one she'd worn to Lily's birthday dinner. Her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "You came," Ethan said, unable to keep the relief from his voice. "Your invitation was very formal," Sophie replied, taking a tentative step forward. "A courier delivered it to my door." "I wasn't sure you'd answer a text or call," he admitted. "I probably wouldn't have," she acknowledged, her honesty a reminder of what had first drawn him to her. But a hand-delivered invitation about the community center? That was harder to ignore. "I hoped it might be." Ethan gestured to the small seating area near the edge of the rooftop. "Would you like to sit? There's wine or tea if you prefer." Sophie moved to the railing instead, gazing out at the city lights. "You named it after me," she said quietly. "The community center." "Yes." "Why?" Ethan joined her at the railing, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite his desire to close the gap between them. "Because it was your idea. Your vision for what your community needed." "But why my name?" she pressed, turning to face him. "Why not call it the Stone Foundation Center, or something corporate and impressive?" "Because you are the heart of it," Ethan said simply. "Just as you became the heart of everything." Sophie's breath caught audibly, her eyes searching his face as if looking for signs of insincerity. "Ethan, please," he interrupted gently. "Let me say this. I've rehearsed it too many times to lose my nerve now." A ghost of a smile touched her lips as she nodded. "You were right," Ethan began, the admission easier than he'd expected. "The job offer did begin as a way to make amends. I felt responsible for your situation, and I wanted to fix it. That's who I was. Someone who solved problems, who controlled outcomes." He took a deep breath, gathering courage for the harder truths. But then something happened that I didn't anticipate. You. The real you, not just the woman I'd inconvenienced. Your intelligence, your determination, the way you stood your ground even when intimidated, the way you loved Lily with such fierce devotion. Ethan moved closer, heartened when Sophie didn't step away. Somewhere between late nights over takeout containers and Lily's dragon drawings, you stopped being an obligation and became essential. To my happiness. To my sense of what matters. Sophie's eyes glistened in the soft light, but she remained silent, listening. "I didn't tell you how it began because by the time we mattered, the beginning seemed irrelevant," Ethan continued. "And yes, perhaps that was wrong. Perhaps you deserved complete transparency from the start. But Sophie, please believe that what grew between us was real, is real." He reached for her hand, relief flooding through him when she allowed the contact. "I love you," he said, the words simple but weighted with absolute certainty, not out of guilt or obligation or any sense of responsibility. I love you because you make me better, because you see me. Not the CEO or the billionaire, but the man underneath who sometimes feels lost in his own life. A tear slipped down Sophie's cheek. I was so afraid, she whispered. So afraid that I was just your good deed, that you'd wake up one day and realize I wasn't worth the complications I brought into your life. You were never a complication, Ethan said firmly. You were the solution to a problem I didn't even know I had. A life full of success, but empty of meaning. Sophie's free hand rose to touch his face, the gesture so achingly familiar that Ethan had to restrain himself from pulling her into his arms. I saw the community center today, she said softly. The scholarship office for single parents. Another of your ideas, he reminded her. One of many that made me see the world differently. I've been so stubborn, Sophie admitted, a rueful smile touching her lips. So determined to protect myself that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. And what was that? Ethan asked, hardly daring to hope. A man who loves me, she said simply. Not despite my circumstances, but including them. A man who remembers the small things. How I take my coffee, which stories make Lily laugh. The dreams I whisper in the dark. She stepped closer, eliminating the last space between them. I love you too, Ethan. I think I have for a long time, but I was too afraid to trust it. Too afraid to believe I could be more than someone's responsibility. The words Ethan had longed to hear for weeks washed over him like a benediction. He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away tears. Sophie Winters, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You have never been just a responsibility to me. You have been a revelation. When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. Sophie's arms wound around his neck as she pressed closer, the kiss deepening with weeks of longing and newfound certainty. I've missed you, Ethan murmured against her lips. Both of you. The penthouse feels empty without Lily's laughter and your terrible singing in the kitchen. Sophie pulled back to give him an indignant look. My singing is not terrible. It's enthusiastic, he corrected diplomatically, earning a playful swat to his chest. Lily's missed you too, Sophie said, growing serious again. She keeps drawing pictures of dragons coming back home. Home, Ethan repeated, the word carrying weight beyond its simple syllable. Is that what we were building, Sophie? A home? I think we were, she said softly. I think we still could be, if you want that. I want that more than anything, Ethan said with absolute conviction. You and Lily, you're my family now. The family I choose. The family I'll fight for every day if you'll let me. Sophie's answer was in her kiss, tender and fierce all at once, a promise and a new beginning wrapped in a single moment. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky, witnesses to a love that had weathered misunderstanding and fear to emerge stronger. And as the city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars, Ethan and Sophie held each other close, no longer separated by doubt, united instead by the certainty that what they'd found was worth fighting for, worth keeping, worth believing in. Chapter 24, Grand Gesture in Motion. Ethan Stone paced the length of his penthouse, phone pressed to his ear. The city lights twinkled below, but he barely noticed the view that had once been his pride. His mind was consumed with one thought. Sophie. Everything set for tonight? He asked, his voice tense with an emotion his employees would have been shocked to hear. Vulnerability. All arranged exactly as you requested. James, his brother, and most trusted confidant confirmed. Though I still think you're taking a huge risk. What if she doesn't show? Ethan paused by the window, his reflection revealing the shadows beneath his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights since Sophie had walked away. Then I'll have failed at the only thing that truly matters. After ending the call, Ethan moved to his closet, selecting a charcoal suit that Sophie had once complimented. Not his usual power attire, but something softer, more approachable. Tonight wasn't about the CEO of Stone Enterprises. Tonight was about the man who had fallen hopelessly in love with a woman who saw through his carefully constructed walls. The memory of their last encounter haunted him. Her tear-filled eyes, the hurt in her voice when she discovered what she believed was his betrayal. Was any of it real, Ethan? Or was I just another project for you to fix after that first spill? He hadn't been able to make her understand then. Tonight, he would make sure she knew the truth. Sophie balanced Lily on her hip as she fumbled with her apartment keys, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders after another long day. 3 weeks had passed since she'd walked away from Ethan, and the ache in her chest hadn't diminished as she'd hoped it would. "Can we have mac and cheese tonight?" Lily asked, playing with the end of Sophie's braid. "Sure, Bug." Sophie managed to smile for her daughter. "And maybe some of those carrot sticks you pretend to hate but secretly eat when you think I'm not looking." Lily giggled, the sound momentarily lightening Sophie's heart. At least one thing in her life remained perfect and uncomplicated. Inside, Sophie found her friend Kate sitting on the couch, an unusual sight on a Thursday evening. "Kate, what are you doing here? I thought you had that client dinner tonight." Kate stood, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "Change of plans. I'm here to watch Lily for a few hours." Sophie set her daughter down, confusion furrowing her brow. "I didn't ask for a sitter." "No, but someone else did." Kate handed her an elegant cream envelope. "This came for you today." Sophie's heart stuttered as she recognized the heavy stationery, the same type Ethan used for important correspondence. With slightly trembling fingers, she opened it, pulling out a single card embossed with his distinctive handwriting. Where it all began. 7 p.m. tonight. Please come. He sent a car, too, Kate added, nodding toward the window. It's waiting downstairs. Sophie shook her head, a protective anger flaring. I'm not going. Whatever game he's playing. It's not a game, Kate interrupted gently. Sophie, I've never seen a man look as devastated as Ethan did when he came to ask for my help. Whatever happened between you two, he's trying to make it right. Mommy? Lily tugged at her hand. Is Mr. Ethan sending you on a princess adventure? Sophie knelt to her daughter's level, smoothing back her curls. It's complicated, Bug. Is it because you're sad? Lily asked with a child's piercing insight. You're always sad when you think I'm sleeping. The simple observation struck Sophie's heart. She had tried to shield Lily from her pain, but children saw more than adults gave them credit for. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, Sophie explained carefully. But Grandpa says when you love somebody, you have to fight for them, Lily said solemnly, even when it's hard. Out of the mouths of babes. Sophie looked from her daughter to Kate, who raised an eyebrow in silent challenge. You don't have to stay, Kate said. Just hear what he has to say. If it's not enough, I'll have ice cream and wine waiting. Sophie glanced down at her simple work dress and practical flats. I'm not exactly dressed for whatever this is. Kate grinned, pulling her toward the bedroom. That's why I brought options. Nothing says I'm listening but still mad at you like a killer outfit. 30 minutes later, Sophie descended the stairs of her apartment building, heart hammering against her ribs. She wore a deep blue wrap dress that brought out the gold in her hair and subtle makeup that Kate had insisted on to make him suffer a little. The familiar black town car waited at the curb, Harrison standing beside it with a respectful nod. Good evening, Ms. Winters, he greeted her, opening the door. It's good to see you again. Hello, Harrison, Sophie replied, sliding into the back seat. I suppose you can't tell me what this is all about. A rare smile crossed the driver's professional demeanor. Mr. Stone was quite specific about maintaining the surprise, but if I may say so, I believe you'll find it worth the mystery. As they pulled away from the curb, Sophie gazed out the window, memories washing over her. The first disastrous meeting at Lumiere when she'd spilled drinks on Ethan's expensive suit, his unexpected job offer, the gradual softening between them as professional boundaries blurred into something deeper, the tender moments with Lily, the way his eyes had lit when she'd finally admitted her feelings. And then the overheard conversation that had shattered everything. Of course I hired her after the incident. It was the responsible thing to do. Ethan's voice, cool and detached, speaking to his father. The situation has been managed appropriately. Sophie closed her eyes against the pain of the memory. Had she been nothing more than damage control? A PR problem to be managed? The car slowed, pulling Sophie from her thoughts. She looked up to find they had arrived at Lumiere, the upscale restaurant where their story had begun. A knot formed in her throat as Harrison opened her door. "Mr. Stone is waiting inside," he said gently. Sophie hesitated, one foot on the pavement. "Harrison, be honest with me. Is this just some elaborate apology before he moves on? Because I don't think I can—" "Ms. Winters," Harrison interrupted with uncharacteristic frankness. "In the 7 years I've worked for Mr. Stone, I've never seen him as determined or as terrified as he is tonight. Whatever you decide, I believe his intentions are sincere." Gathering her courage, Sophie nodded and walked toward the restaurant entrance. The maitre d' greeted her with immediate recognition. "Ms. Winters, welcome back to Lumiere. We've been expecting you." He gestured toward the back of the restaurant. "If you'll follow me." Instead of leading her to the main dining room, he guided her through a discreet door and up a flight of stairs she hadn't known existed. At the top, he paused before an elegant set of double doors. "Mr. Stone awaits you," he said, opening the doors with a flourish. Sophie stepped through into a space transformed. The restaurant's private rooftop garden, normally reserved for exclusive events, had been converted into an intimate wonderland. Twinkling lights hung from pergolas, casting a warm glow over lush greenery. In the center stood a single table set for two, surrounded by arrangements of wildflowers. The same varieties she'd once mentioned were her favorites. And there, standing beside the table, was Ethan. He looked different somehow. Still impeccably dressed, but with a vulnerability in his posture she'd rarely seen. When their eyes met, the naked hope in his gaze nearly undid her resolve. "Sophie," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted, remaining by the doorway. "Why am I here, Ethan?" He gestured to the space around them. "I wanted to bring you back to where it all began, but this time without the spilled drinks and ruined contracts." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Though I'd gladly let you spill 100 drinks on me if it meant another chance." Despite herself, Sophie felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "That's quite an offer from a man who once told me my apology couldn't fix anything." "I was wrong about many things that night," Ethan acknowledged, taking a careful step toward her. "But not about the most important thing. That meeting you would change my life." Sophie crossed her arms, protecting her heart. "I heard you, Ethan. Talking to your father about how hiring me was the responsible thing to do. How you managed the situation appropriately. Was I just damage control for your conscience?" Pain flashed across Ethan's features. "Is that what you think? That everything between us was some kind of corporate strategy?" "What am I supposed to think?" Sophie's voice cracked slightly. "You never told me the real reason you offered me that job." "Because I was ashamed," Ethan admitted, his composure slipping. "Yes, I initially offered you the position out of guilt. You lost your job because of me, and I wanted to make it right. But Sophie—" He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's not why I fell in love with you." The raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "Then why?" "Because you challenged me when everyone else deferred. Because you saw the man behind the CEO when I'd forgotten he existed. Because watching you with Lily showed me what real strength looks like." Ethan's voice softened. "I fell in love with you because you made me want to be worthy of being loved in return." Sophie felt tears threatening, but she held them back. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" "Pride. Fear. The habits of a lifetime spent keeping people at a distance." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. By the time I realized what you meant to me, I was afraid the truth would make you doubt everything else between us. I was a coward, Sophie. He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a folded document. What you overheard was only part of a longer conversation. My father was questioning my judgment, suggesting your hiring was an emotional decision rather than a business one. I was trying to protect you, and us, from his interference. He held out the paper. This is what I was actually discussing with him. With hesitant fingers, Sophie took the document, unfolding it to reveal official Stone Enterprises letterhead. As she scanned the contents, her eyes widened. This is a scholarship program? Ethan nodded. The Sophie Winters Scholarship for Single Parents, full tuition and childcare support for parents pursuing business degrees. The board approved it yesterday. Sophie looked up, stunned. You named a scholarship after me? It was inspired by you, Ethan corrected gently. By your determination to create a better future for Lily while pursuing your own dreams. My father was arguing against it, saying it was an inappropriate use of company resources. What you heard was me trying to separate my professional decisions from my personal feelings, to make him understand this wasn't just about you and me. He took another step closer, close enough now that Sophie could catch the familiar scent of his cologne. But he was right about one thing. Everything I do now is influenced by loving you. And I'm not ashamed of that anymore. Sophie's fingers tightened on the paper, her defenses wavering. Ethan, there's more, he said quietly, gesturing to the table. Please just hear me out completely before you decide. After a moment's hesitation, Sophie nodded, allowing him to guide her to the table. As she sat, she noticed a small velvet box beside her plate, her heart skipping a beat at its implications. It's not what you think, Ethan said quickly, noticing her gaze. Or rather, not yet. I wouldn't presume. He took a deep breath, visibly gathering his courage as he sat across from her. 3 days ago, I walked away from the Westlake merger. Sophie's jaw dropped. The deal you've been working on for months? The one worth millions, yes, Ethan finished. My father nearly had a stroke when I told him. But why would you do that? Because they insisted on replacing the current management team, including your grandfather's former assistant manager who now runs the coffee shop. Ethan's eyes held hers steadily. They wanted to convert it into another chain location. I couldn't let that happen. Sophie stared at him, speechless. The Westlake merger had been Ethan's focus for months, a deal that would have significantly expanded Stone Enterprises' portfolio. You sacrificed a major business deal for my grandfather's coffee shop? She finally managed. For the place that matters to you, Ethan corrected. For the people who are your family. And to prove once and for all that nothing, no contract, no merger, no amount of money, matters more to me than your happiness. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. I've spent my life building an empire of glass and steel, Sophie, but it means nothing without someone to share it with. Someone who reminds me why I'm building it in the first place. With trembling fingers, he pushed the velvet box toward her. This isn't a proposal, not yet. It's a promise. Sophie hesitated before opening the box. Inside lay not a ring, but a delicate gold key on a chain. A key? She questioned, looking up at him. To my home, Ethan explained softly, which has felt empty since you left it. It's yours whenever you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or months from now. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that what we had, what we could have, is real. Sophie lifted the key, its weight solid and significant in her palm. And if I'm never ready? Pain flashed across Ethan's features, but he met her gaze steadily. Then I'll still ensure the scholarship program continues. I'll still protect your grandfather's legacy. And I'll still love you, Sophie Winters, even if you never walk through my door again. The simple, devastating honesty in his voice broke through the last of Sophie's defenses. Tears she'd been holding back spilled onto her cheeks. You hurt me, she whispered. I know, Ethan acknowledged, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "And I will spend every day making up for that if you'll let me." "And Lily, she was just starting to trust you." A soft smile touched Ethan's lips. "I have it on good authority that Lily believes every princess story needs a dragon who learns to be gentle. I'd like the chance to be that for her. And for you." Sophie closed her fingers around the key, feeling its edges press into her palm. The man before her wasn't the cold CEO she'd first encountered, nor even the guarded man who'd gradually opened his heart to her. This was Ethan stripped of all pretense, offering everything he was with no guarantee of acceptance. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "Loving you means risking everything again." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "But Sophie, some risks are worth taking." He reached across the table, palm up in invitation. "I'm asking you to take this one with me." Sophie looked at his outstretched hand, remembering all the moments that had led them here. From spilled drinks to shared laughter, from professional boundaries to profound connection. The journey hadn't been smooth or simple, but perhaps the most meaningful things never were. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his.